Chapter 231. After the minor friction, the two returned to normal, and the matter passed. Neither party mentioned what happened that day, and the two were like all lovers. They had always been following the normal mode of getting along, usually dating and eating together after get off work, without any messy things to disturb them. And the relationship between the young couple became more and more stable. As for the other two people's affairs, Nan Yen didn't pay much attention to them. She was not in a hurry. Whether it was out of regret or unwillingness, the other party would come to them sooner or later. Maybe it was really what she said. In just a few days, when Nan Yen was lamenting that her life was boring and no one was making trouble, she received a call from Zhou Yuyu. To be honest, this call was really unexpected. She originally thought that the ex-boyfriend should come to her first, but she didn't expect that Zhou Yuyu came to her first. After the call was connected, the tone of the other party was not friendly, and even carried a sense of resentment and anxiety. It was obvious that he was venting his emotions to her. "Xia Nan Yen, do you still have any conscience? Ji Yunshin was in a car accident. Did you know?" Zhou Yuyu almost lost control of her emotions and shouted this sentence to the other side. She didn't know what was going on now. Obviously, a person who was fine in the previous life had a car accident inexplicably in this life. And she, who should have been in a car accident in the previous life, is now safe and sound. She now even doubts whether it is because of her rebirth that this childhood sweetheart's life has undergone an unpredictable change. But she never wanted such a result. In fact, she was really unhappy during this period, and almost everything deviated from her expectations. It was clear that Ji Yunshin had some affection for her some time ago. At least, considering that they had been childhood sweethearts. He did not blame her too much even if he was angry. But since he had a dispute with Lin Shirshu last time and broke up with Xia Nan Yen, he was even too lazy to see her now. The car accident happened last night. She didn't know what happened at all. When she couldn't get through to Ji Yunshin's phone, she learned from a friend that Ji Yunshin had a car accident at night. Nan Yen was indeed a little surprised by such a sudden news. She didn't expect Ji Yunshin to have a car accident. But listening to the blaming tone of the person on the other side, it seemed that the reason for Ji Yunshin's car accident was all because of her. But she has been honest all this time, and has not done anything bad. Okay? The tone of the other party was sincere, and didn't seem fake. Nan Yen could even hear the other party crying and complaining. In this situation, she couldn't just not react. After all, she couldn't miss such a good opportunity. No matter what her position was, Nan Yen felt that if she didn't go too far, it would be okay to go and see her ex-boyfriend. So after asking for the address and ward number, Nan Yen planned to go to the hospital to check the situation. In the hospital on the other side, Lin Shirshu looked at the scene in front of him calmly. Although it was a little unexpected, it was not unacceptable. Ji Yunshin had a car accident, and it was his ex-girlfriend who took care of him. This scene was a little weird no matter how you looked at it. However, Lin Shirshu was not the attending physician. He just came with his colleagues to make rounds and record the patient's recent condition. In fact, Ji Yunshin's injuries were relatively lucky. He was not in danger of life. Most of them were flesh injuries. However, car accidents are always serious. His left shoulder was scratched by the windshield. The wound was about 2 fingers long. He bled a lot, so it was scary when he was sent here. After Lin Shirshu finished his rounds, he recorded various symptoms in a book. After recording all this, he turned around and prepared to leave. However, his ex-girlfriend behind him finally couldn't help chasing him out. Zhou Yuyu did not hide her resentment and dissatisfaction. "Lin Shirshu, do you see that I don't even have a word now? Do you think I am sorry for you? So every time you see me, I turn a blind eye to it." Zhou Yuyu's eyes were a little red, especially when she said this. She obviously couldn't control her emotions. She didn't know if the pressure and blow she had suffered recently was too great. She really couldn't stand his indifferent look now, as if she was sorry for him. But it was obviously not like that. She had given him many chances in her previous life, but he was the one who never changed for her. How could he put all these things on her now? The scene of Ji Yunshin lying in the hospital reminded her of the scene in her previous life when she was lying in the hospital and no one cared about her. Especially when she saw her former boyfriend wearing a cold doctor's uniform and walking past her with an expressionless face. But he was always indifferent. That scene seemed to overlap with the latitude of her previous life at a certain moment. Memories of 2 lives suddenly came to her mind. For a moment, she even felt a little resentful. She resented why he was so cold. Why she was the only one who had memories of the previous life. Why she was the only one who was still brooding over the past. And even made her want to blame him for his indifference without confidence. She thought that she could change everything after she was reborn. But now nothing has changed. Not only did she lose her boyfriend, but she also lost the only childhood sweetheart who really loved her. If Lin Xirshu's bad habits could not be changed like in his previous life, and he still resisted anyone getting close to him, she might not be so resentful. But not long after she proposed breaking up, this man could easily give all those responses and admiration to another person without reservation. How could she be willing to accept this? She thought he had at least a little bit of guilt and nostalgia for her. But what does it mean now? When Lin Xirshu heard this, his brows slightly frowned, and he turned his head to look at his ex-girlfriend with red eyes behind him. It was obvious that he didn't quite understand where her deep hatred for him came from. After all, he hadn't done anything excessive to her. Sometimes he wondered if Zhou Yuyu was resentful of someone else through him. However, this situation was unlikely. Lin Xirshu suppressed his annoyance and glanced at the notebook in his hand. He felt that she was sad because of Ji Yunshin's matter. So she was so irrational. So he looked at her again and said in a steady voice, "He is fine now. The attending doctor should have told you that he will naturally regain consciousness after the effect of the medicine wears off. After that, you just need to stay in the hospital to recuperate. If there is nothing else, I have other things to do." Perhaps she was really irritated by his official attitude. Zhou Yuyu's eyes, which were originally filled with water, suddenly burst into hatred. She couldn't help but yell at him. "Lin Xirshu, you don't know anything at all. You have always been the most outrageous person. Why are you so cold and indifferent now? I am obviously the victim in this relationship. Why do you treat me so confidently? If it was in the previous life." When she said this, Lin Xirshu might still be affected a little. After all, the time they had been together was not short. But now, Lin Xirshu just felt confused. Fortunately, he was still calm at the moment. So he turned his head to look at his ex-girlfriend behind him. Lin Xirshu's eyes met hers, and his brows never relaxed during the whole process. He slowly straightened the corners of his lips, and the expression on his face became serious. He was silent for a few seconds, and finally said calmly, "It's up to you to think about it. I just think that since we have broken up, indifference is the last respect for each other. I don't mean to look down on you, nor do I feel that I am justified. It's you who are out of control now and think too much." After saying this, Lin Xirshu did not bother with her anymore, and left directly. Turning to the next ward, Zhou Yuyu, who stayed where she was, clenched her fingers, watching the other person's back as he left. And the grievances and resentments in her heart suddenly surged out like a tide. Was it really all her fault? What was wrong with her wanting to live a better life? But now, she really didn't know what to do. On the other side, Nan Yin came to the hospital directly after receiving the news. In fact, at the beginning of the car accident, a kind person called her mobile phone. But she had blocked Ji Yunshin's number long ago, so she never received the news. When she arrived at the hospital, Ji Yunshin, who was originally lying on the bed, had actually woken up. After the effect of the anesthetic needle wore off, his body had regained consciousness. But Ji Yunshin was still resting with his eyes closed. There was no one else at the door of the ward at this time. And Zhou Yuyu, who called her, didn't know where she went. As soon as Nan Yin entered the room, she saw the young man lying on the bed, with a thick layer of bandages wrapped around his arms, a piece of gauze on his forehead, and a white hospital gown. His face was a little pale, and he looked obviously not energetic. But it was no wonder. After all, he had just experienced a car accident. Seeing this scene, Nan Yin did not make a sound to disturb his rest. She put the bouquet in her hand into the vase beside her, put down the fruit basket in her hand, and prepared to leave. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded behind him. Perhaps because he didn't drink much water, his throat sounded obviously dry and hoarse. "Do you hate me to this extent now? Don't you even want to say a word to me?" Hearing this, Nan Yin paused in her action of holding the door handle. It turned out that this man had woken up. She turned her head and glanced at Ji Yunshin behind her, pursed her lips and said calmly, "No, I just don't want to disturb your rest." Yen. Nan Yin looked at him. "What's wrong?" Ji Yunshin suddenly called her name. He slowly raised his head and supported his body with some effort, trying to sit up from the bed. But he might be injured and had no strength. Can you come and help me? My other hand is injured. And I can't move easily. I don't have the strength to stand up. Nan Yen didn't step forward, but hesitated and said, You just had the operation. If you know that the injury is serious, don't move. Hearing this, Ji Yunshin suddenly lowered his head and chuckled. There was an indescribable meaning in his smile. Perhaps because of this car accident. His mood was not as depressed as before, but became much more stable. And the relationship between the two became a little more relaxed. Ji Yunshin looked at her face and said in a light tone, You don't hate me, but you don't even want to help me? I won't do anything to you. Is this request not acceptable? This person has also learned to retreat in order to advance. Nan Yen seemed helpless after hearing this, so she could only purse her lips, then walk towards the bed, slowly raised the cushion under the bed, and reached out to carefully help the person up. When she was ready and about to step back, Ji Yunshin suddenly reached out and grabbed Nan Yen's wrist, and then exerted force on his hand and pulled the person forward. Nan Yan's center of gravity suddenly became unstable, and her body pressed uncontrollably towards the person on the bed. She didn't know where the pressure was pressed. She only heard a slight groan from the other person's mouth, and it was obvious that he was hit hard. But even so, the man still didn't let go. Nan Yen was startled by his sudden action, and subconsciously stood up and checked his physical condition. What are you doing? Don't you know that you just had an operation and are still injured? Nan Yen frowned slightly, especially when she saw that the gauze on his wrist had begun to bleed. Her face turned pale, and she quickly reached out to press the call button on the bedside. But this action was stopped by the other party. Nan Yen turned her head to look at him. What are you doing? Ji Yunshin held Nan Yen's wrist, looked at the blood on her wrist again, frowned slightly and slowly let go, and said in a gentle tone, No need to call someone over. It's just a little pressure. It's not that serious. And it doesn't hurt much. It's not serious even if it's bleeding? Nan Yan's tone was obviously a little anxious. And in this anxiety, she didn't care that this person kept holding her wrist. Perhaps because her face was not looking good. Ji Yunshin whispered to comfort her. How about you help me deal with it again? There is a small medicine box on the bedside. It's not a big deal. Just a little bleeding. Hearing this, Nan Yen had no choice. Looking at the man sitting peacefully at the head of the bed, and seeing the bleeding wound on his wrist, she could only open the small medicine box on the bedside table, carefully unwrap the bloody gauze on his wrist, carefully clean the blood, and then apply some medicine, and then rewrap it. Ji Yunshin looked at Nan Yen, who was carefully cleaning his wounds across from him, and was silent for a while. He also knew that his behavior of leaving someone here with the injury was somewhat despicable. But he really hadn't looked at her so quietly for a long time. He looked at Nan Yen just like before. The two of them didn't speak during the whole process. Yin Yan's brows were also twisted all the time, and her expression was careful and serious. From time to time, she would ask him if it hurt, whether her strength was too strong, and so on. This process made him feel a little dazed, as if the two of them had returned to the time before they broke up. After bandaging the wound on her wrist, Nan Yen put the bandage and gauze on her hand back together, but accidentally touched a small box on the cabinet, and a ring fell out of it. The ring fell on the floor, making a ding sound, instantly breaking the quiet atmosphere between the two. Ji Yunshin saw her pause. His eyes fell on the small ring on the floor, and subconsciously held her hand. He pursed his lips and wanted to tell her that the ring was actually bought by him in the store after the last quarrel, and he originally wanted to show her his feelings and attitude. He thought that if she was really worried, they could get engaged first. He was really just soft-hearted towards Zhou Yuyu and took care of her as a sister. But before he could say those apologies, things became the final out-of-control situation. He never thought of breaking up with her. Ji Yunshin's fingers tightened around Nan Yan's. He just kept looking at her. He didn't know how long it had been before he slowly asked, Yan Yan, can we make peace? Ji Yunshin's lips moved. His voice was a little hoarse, and his eyes were still fixed on her face when he said this, as if he wanted to see a trace of emotion or hesitation on her face. But he didn't seem to see it. When Nan Yan heard this, she raised her face. In fact, there was no change in her eyes when she looked at him. She just pursed her lips, and then slowly pulled her fingers out of his palm. Ji Yunshin, it's over between us. Her voice was gentle and sounded very calm. I have a new life now. I came to see you this time only because we were together before. Maybe what I said last time was a bit too much. But I don't want you to have any accidents because of the breakup. Ji Yunshin's face turned pale instantly. His body became more and more stiff, and his heart became more and more sad. The sadness could not be described in words. The only place in his body that still had a trace of consciousness was his chest. His heart seemed to be stung by something, and the pain was so severe that his lips trembled uncontrollably. His fingers were stiff, and he still wanted to hold her hand. He finally held her fingers with difficulty, fearing that he would miss this last chance. Don't say such things. Okay? I can change. I can change many things. The contradiction between them is not the kind of irreversible conflict. He really knows that he is wrong. Why is he unwilling to give him another chance? Ji Yunshin's throat was a little choked, and his tone even had a bit of begging. I can promise that I will definitely keep a distance from Zhou Yuyu in the future. I really won't do those unnecessary things anymore. And I won't care about her affairs anymore. Yan, let's start over. Okay? And Nan Yan lowered her head and still pushed his hand away steadily. Not only that, she also stabbed him in the heart, making his lips pale. It's too late, Ji Yunshin. I already have a boyfriend now. It's not fake that I'm with Lin Shirshu. Maybe in the future, we will get married. Before she finished speaking, she saw Ji Yunshin's fingers tremble uncontrollably, and the fingers that had been holding her tightly gradually relaxed. After a long while, she heard the other party's difficult and dry voice slowly ringing in her ears. Is there really no chance at all? Nan Yan shook her head and said nothing. But the attitude was very obvious. Ji Yunshin suddenly felt his eyes were a little sour. His mind was in chaos, and he didn't know what to say. At this moment, even if he was slow, he should know that it was impossible for them to be together. Perhaps he had this premonition a long time ago, but he just didn't want to admit it. Ji Yunshin suddenly felt that the wound caused by the car accident began to hurt again. It hurt more and more, as if a needle was stuck straight into the gap between the bones, drilling into it. In the end, he didn't know where the pain came from, whether it came from his body or his chest. He didn't even know when the person next to him left. On the other side, Nan Yan just went out and bumped into Zhou Yuyu, who was standing at the door. He didn't know when she came and how much of the conversation between the two people she heard. But her complexion looked bad, and there was an indescribable depression in her expression, especially the look she gave her, which was full of sarcasm and disdain, probably because she thought she had no conscience and was not worthy of visiting Ji Yunshin. Zhou Yuyu suddenly said this, stopping Nan Yan, who was about to leave. I have something to clarify with you. Nan Yan looked at her impatient expression, but did not refuse. So the two walked to the corridor on the other side, which was relatively remote and not many people were walking around. So even if there was a dispute, it was unlikely to be seen by others. Zhou Yuyu looked at Nan Yan in front of her with resentment. She just wanted to make one thing clear now. And she said directly, I don't have any messy relationship with Ji Yunshin, and I will stay away from him in the future. Are you satisfied now? When Zhou Yuyu said this, she inevitably felt resentful and aggrieved. She really felt that the woman in front of her was making trouble for no reason. After all, she and Ji Yunshin had been together for more than 10 years. If you really count, Xia Nan Yan is the outsider between her and Ji Yunshin. But what can she do now? Because the breakup of the two people turned out like this. Zhou Yuyu felt some regret and fear in her heart for the first time when she looked at her childhood sweetheart who was lying in a coma on the bed. She was a little worried that because of her excessive intervention, she would eventually cause the ending that belonged to her in the previous life to befall this childhood sweetheart. Especially when she saw his muddle-headed appearance during this period. She felt sad and embarrassed. So far, she really couldn't help it. After all, isn't Xia Nanyan's attitude to make her leave Ji Yunshin completely? Now that she has what she wants, isn't it okay for her to not disturb their lives in the future? So she said this directly to Nan Yan. And Nan Yan now understands what she means. Maybe she really thinks she is an innocent victim. Nothing happened between her and Ji Yunshin, but she has to bear all the resistance and hurt. Maybe she still feels that she is quite wronged. In order to make the two reconcile, she not only gave up her obsession, but also let go of the childhood sweethearts of the two, and instantly turned into an image of a victim who forbears and feels wronged. Nan Yan was also impressed by this person's brain circuit. It was obviously her who inexplicably broke into the relationship of other young couples from the beginning. And now she said something like stay away from him. Are you satisfied now? This was said very aggrievedly, as if others had wronged her. But all this was clearly her own fault. Nan Yin looked up at Zhou Yuyu. Do you think it's still useful to say this now? Ji Yunshin and I have broken up. Is it interesting to say these decent words now to show your grievances? Zhou Yuyu's face turned pale instantly. She was not a fool, and it was impossible for her not to hear the sarcasm in this person's tone. The string in her heart was tense, and her tone was naturally very unfriendly. What else do you want from me? I have already promised to stay away from you. Isn't this enough for you to be satisfied? Her eyes were obviously red when she said this. Nan Yin saw that this person was a little emotionally unstable. She chuckled and looked at her and said, It's okay. Anyway, how others treat me, I will naturally treat others the same way. As for what you said, it has nothing to do with me now. Well, if you don't have anything else to do, I'm leaving too. After saying this, Nan Yin turned around and was about to leave. Zhou Yuyu on the opposite side was obviously stunned for a moment. She might still be thinking about what she meant. And then she quickly reacted, as if she understood something vaguely. She suddenly reached out and grabbed Nan Yin's wrist, her eyes fixed on the woman in front of her. So you are with Lin Shirshu to retaliate against me? Nan Yin turned her head and glanced at the other party, and suddenly chuckled and said, So what? I was with him on purpose. What can you do? Are you only allowed to contact other people's boyfriends, and not others to get close to your boyfriend? Zhou Yuyu, don't you like to show the deep affection between you and Ji Yunshin in front of me? You flirt with him in front of me. You know more about his allergies than I do. You always like to get into my boyfriend's arms when you are drunk, and you like to tell him about your past. You have no sense of propriety at all, and you don't know how to avoid suspicion. You are so affectionate with them in front of me, your girlfriend, as if I am the third party between you two childhood sweethearts. Do you really think that others are blind and can't see your thoughts? These words successfully made Zhou Yuyu pale. Nan Yin smiled at people and continued. Then do you want to see how Lin Shirshu treats me? Although he is misophobia, he never resists me. It was probably this sentence that completely broke Zhou Yuyu's psychological defense. For so many years, in the time of 2 lifetimes combined, she has always cared about this. Zhou Yuyu pinched her white fingers and tried to control her temper. She knew that this person had been brooding over the last incident, but she didn't expect that she was so mean. Zhou Yuyu's eyes were getting redder and redder. Her chest was heaving, and she almost lost control and shouted at her. So you took advantage of Lin Shirshu's feelings. Do you think you can take revenge on me like this? Xia Nan Yin, don't you feel guilty for doing this? Nan Yin looked surprised, as if she thought it was ridiculous. Why should I feel guilty? People like you don't have the slightest guilt. Why should I have such extra emotions? What's more, Lin Shirshu likes me now, doesn't he? After saying this, she was too lazy to continue to entangle with this person. Nan Yin actually didn't have much intention to deal with her, but this person's attitude of compromise really made people feel uncomfortable. Since this person made her uncomfortable, she naturally had to return it exactly. Zhou Yuyu on the side bit her lip. Her eyes were full of resentment, and she obviously hadn't recovered from the shock just now. It was not until Nan Yin left that she came back to her senses. Neither of them noticed that a piece of white clothing flashed by at the corner of the corridor, stayed for only a short time, and soon disappeared. Chapter 232. After facing Zhou Yuyu's outburst without regard for her feelings, Nan Yin left the hospital in a good mood. She did not look for Lin Shirshu for the time being, knowing that he was still working, and took a taxi home directly. After returning home, she did not do anything, just curled up on the sofa and watched the horror movie she had not finished watching 2 days ago. Nan Yin did not know that her boyfriend had seen her talking nonsense in the hospital for the time being, and she was not worried that Zhou Yuyu would tell Lin Shirshu about these things. Although there might be some minor troubles, they were not unsolvable. As for Lin Shirshu on the other side, he probably did not expect to hear such a speech today, and he was not in a good mood after hearing these words. He did not know how to describe his emotions at the moment. He was angry, but he might not have lost his mind. In fact, he knew that Nan Yin was with him mostly because of anger, but he did not expect her to reveal it so thoroughly. He thought, Yin Yin at least liked him a little. Otherwise, why would she always like to tease him? Lin Shirshu sat quietly on the chair in the office, staring at the wrinkled recording board in his hand with a faint expression, and some unspeakable emotions were surging in his heart. Then he put the cutting board on the table, leaned back, and the ends of his black hair fell down, loosely hanging on his smooth forehead. Lin Shirshu closed his eyes and opened them again. The light golden frame made his face look more distant and cold. And this cold mood continued until after get-off work. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that something was wrong with Dr. Lin. He was quite easygoing in the morning. How could he become like this after going out for a while? However, several colleagues were too embarrassed to ask. After all, this person was known for his strange personality. And this was also a private matter. Several people speculated that Dr. Lin might have encountered something unpleasant. So it was better not to mention such things. It was not until after get-off work that Lin Shirshu called Nan Yin. The two had agreed to go out for dinner together. But now, Lin Shirshu changed his mind temporarily. After he called his girlfriend, he quietly leaned against the car and waited for someone. When Nan Yin went downstairs, she saw a young man with a cold face and a slender figure leaning against the car door to look at his mobile phone under the streetlight not far away. He looked quite focused. I don't know if it was because of the light, but Nan Yin always felt that her boyfriend's back looked a little indifferent at this moment. But Nan Yin didn't think much about it. In her opinion, her boyfriend, who didn't speak, did look a little cold. Nan Yin ran towards her boyfriend, hugged his shoulders with both hands, kissed him on the face without hesitation, and then coaxed him, "Boyfriend, you seem a little unhappy today. Have you been waiting for me for too long?" Nan Yin turned to his front when she said this, holding his face with both hands. Lin Shirshu stretched out his hand and hugged his girlfriend into his arms, and also held her waist. He looked down at his girlfriend, who was smiling in his arms. Her black and moist eyes were full of smiles and gentleness. Looking at him, so clear that he could see his own reflection. Her gentle smile seemed as if she only had him in her heart and eyes. And she loved him with all her heart. But who could have thought that she would say such ruthless words in front of Zhou Yuyu? Lin Shirshu looked into her eyes, and the distance between them was very close. He could smell the fragrance of her hair as soon as he lowered his head. Lin Shirshu smiled and held one of his girlfriend's hands, gently stroking it in his palm, and then asked her, "Do you think I'm in a bad mood today? Does she have to think about this kind of thing?" Nan Yin suddenly felt that this sounded a little strange. She pulled her fingers out of her boyfriend's palm and pinched his cheek, as if it was some fun toy. "You look a little unhappy. What's wrong? Did you encounter anything unhappy today?" Lin Shirshu lowered his head and smiled, but his face was nonchalant, and then asked, "If I am unhappy, will you comfort me?" Nan Yin nodded without thinking. Yes. She still looked ignorant, with a warm and kind face, and her beautiful eyes looked at him. Her eyes were bright, reflecting a bright smile. Lin Shirshu asked her, "Then how to comfort?" Hearing this, Nan Yin immediately understood. She finally understood what he meant. Stretched out her hands, directly circled her boyfriend's neck, and then pulled him down a long distance. Lin Shirshu was not annoyed, and matched her height, bit over and moved closer, until the other party was about the same height as himself, and then smiled and kissed him. "Can I coax you like this?" She had just kissed her boyfriend and hadn't even finished her words. But this time she was suppressed. Lin Shirshu actually bit her mouth, and it was a real bite. Nan Yan's eyes were red from the pain, and she immediately reached out to pat his chest. Her eyes were full of water, and her fair face flushed with anger, perhaps because she was about to cry. Lin Shirshu let her go. Nan Yin subconsciously pushed the man, but failed to push him away. Instead, he took her into his arms. She was so angry that she slapped him again, making a sound on his shoulder. "Why did you bite me? It hurts so much." Nan Yin pulled her hand back, glared at the man angrily, and then touched her lips. It might be a little red, but it didn't break the skin. But it still hurt. Nan Yin felt that this man's abnormality was more obvious. This was the first time he bit her when they were kissing. Obviously, when she kissed him before, Dr. Lin would blush uncomfortably. But now it was different. She was still wondering if Zhou Yuyu had told him everything they had said in the hospital. But this reaction was not right. Wouldn't a normal person go to his girlfriend to verify this matter as soon as he knew about it? Or should he ask her? Right? Lin Shirshu saw her eyes were filled with tears, and probably thought it was very interesting. His thumb was rubbing back and forth on the skin around her eye sockets, with a sense of carelessness and casualness, making it hard to tell what he meant. Then he suddenly leaned over, lowered his head, and kissed Nan Yin lightly on the lips, as if to coax her. "Does it hurt? Then I'll be more careful next time? And be more careful next time?" Hearing this, Nan Yin couldn't help but slap him on the chest again. She felt that this man was really crazy tonight. and she couldn't help asking, "What happened to you tonight? If you are unhappy, just say it. Don't bully me for no reason." Bully? She was right. He really wanted to bully me. Lin Shirshu rubbed her skin with his fingers. From her cheek to the bitten lip. His fingertips were cold and delicate. In fact, it was not uncomfortable to rub like this. But later he rubbed her skin red. Her lips were also red and congested because of the bite. You can tell what they had just done. He felt better now. When he was in a good mood, his attitude was naturally more normal. Lin Shirshu looked down at her and suddenly couldn't help laughing. As if all the previous haze was swept away. "Are you really angry? I bit too hard. Right? Then I apologize to you. Sorry. Can't I let you bite back?" Nanyan glanced at this man coldly when she heard this. And she was inexplicably disgusted. Who wants to bite back? She is not a dog. However, seeing the man's innocent smile, Nanyan felt a little itchy. So angry that she simply rushed over and bit the man's neck hard. Lin Shirshu's eyebrows moved slightly. But he was not angry. He still held Nanyan's waist with one hand. And when she rushed over, he hugged her tighter. Then rubbed her cheek. And his fluffy and dry hair rubbed Nanyan's neck. And Nanyan also smelled a faint smell of disinfectant on him. Lin Shirshu was also a little painful when he was bitten. Probably because he didn't expect his girlfriend's teeth to be so sharp. He reached out and touched her head. And then looked at the time. And then said, "Okay. Stop making trouble. It's getting late. How about taking you to dinner?" It was really late. The two were supposed to have a date and dinner, but ended up wasting so much time at the gate of the community. Nanyan groaned in anger, pushed the other person's head away with some disgust, and pinched the palm of his hand hard before she gave up. After that, the two got in the car. The young couple chatted and joked, and didn't seem to care about what happened just now. Nanyan originally thought that this man's abnormal behavior had passed. But when his car stopped, Nanyan looked out the window. This was not a restaurant. Didn't they agree to go to the downtown building for Western food? Why did the car drive back to his own home? Nanyan turned around and looked at him in confusion. "Why did I come to your house? Didn't we agree to go out for dinner?" Lin Shirshu unbuckled his seat belt and explained to her with a frown. His tone was natural. "Sorry. I just forgot to tell you. When I first came, the service staff at the restaurant told me that today is the weekend and the restaurant is full of reservations. So I bought fresh steaks and shrimps at a nearby mall. If you want to eat Western food, can I go home and cook it for you? It's cleaner and more sanitary than outside." He said this gently and calmly, his eyes fixed on Nanyan's reaction. He looked much more normal. Nanyan knew about this person's cleanliness problem, but didn't think much about it. After all, it wasn't her first time to come to her boyfriend's house. And this person's cooking skills were pretty good. So she nodded and said, "It's all right. I'm not picky anyway." Lin Shirshu smiled at him. And probably because she looked so well-behaved and obedient, he couldn't help but reach out and pinch her chin. "Okay. You go up first. I'll go park the car." Nanyan agreed and went upstairs with the key. When Lin Shirshu came back, the big bag of food he had purchased had been carried into the house. Lin Shirshu loosened his collar and pushed the door open. As soon as he opened the door, he heard his girlfriend's voice and the sound of the TV in the living room. The TV was hardly played since it was bought. But after his girlfriend came, she often dragged him to watch those bizarre horror movies. Lin Shirshu put his girlfriend's high heels that she had casually changed into the shoe cabinet and arranged them neatly. Took off his coat, hung it on the hanger and stretched it out, and then took out a pair of clean slippers from the shoe cabinet and changed into them. When he walked into the living room, his girlfriend, who was originally curled up on the sofa and making a phone call, heard the noise, immediately turned around and gave him a bright and casual smile, and then waved at him vigorously, which meant that she had something to say. Lin Shirshu walked towards her. As soon as he reached the sofa, his girlfriend hung up the phone, jumped up from the sofa, and jumped on him with a sly smile. "Why are you so slow, Lin Shirshu? I've been waiting for you for a long time. I'm so hungry tonight. Can you go and cook? The steak should be cooked a little. I don't like it too raw." Lin Shirshu hugged her in his arms, but the impact of his girlfriend's jump was too heavy, so he couldn't stabilize his body for a while, and fell directly on the sofa with her in his arms. His girlfriend was pressed under him, and her long, thick black hair spread on the sofa with the movement. The soft hair fell into his hand. Lin Shirshu looked at his girlfriend's bright eyes and defenseless appearance. He couldn't help but reach out and touch the man's lips. Got it. I bought a lot of food. Anyway, I will feed you tonight. Nan Yen couldn't help but smile when she heard it, and patted her boyfriend's face with both hands, still looking unaware and very proud. Then hurry up. Big men shouldn't be so sticky all the time. You have to act quickly. Lin Shirshu was amused and patted the man's thigh. Then let go quickly. How can I get up if you don't let go? Nan Yen smiled and refused to let go. Lin Shirshu knew that his girlfriend was making trouble. While urging the man to hurry up, she raised her legs and deliberately wrapped them around her boyfriend's waist. When he was about to get up, she deliberately pulled him into her arms, smiling and showing a row of white teeth at the corners of her mouth. Obviously she was playing tricks. Lin Shirshu was entangled and couldn't get away. A few strands of hair fell down in the tossing and turning. Although he also enjoyed being close to his girlfriend, it was obviously not the right time. So Lin Shirshu reached out to tickle her. As expected, he couldn't hold it back. His girlfriend's cheeks were red with laughter, and she rolled around on the sofa and twisted into a ball. After a while, she let go without resistance. After she let go, she couldn't help but feel suffocated, complaining that he didn't know how to be humble and didn't have any good qualities that a boyfriend should have. Lin Shirshu listened to her nagging non-stop, and simply hugged her and gave her a long kiss. Then let go of his girlfriend, who was almost out of breath in his arms, and turned to the kitchen to cook. To be honest, Dr. Lin's cooking skills are pretty good, and the steak she fried is also to her taste. The medium-rare steak is the tenderest part of the cow's spine. After frying, the surface is slightly shiny. It is placed on a clean porcelain plate with 2 bright red cherries next to it. This combination is quite pleasing to the eye. She didn't know that Dr. Lin had such a skill before. Anyway, she had a satisfying dinner. Nan Yen was full after eating half a steak and 2 shrimps. She drank some lemonade he prepared, and felt that the greasy taste in her mouth was instantly washed away. Lin Shirshu ate more than her, but the total amount was not much. This amount should be considered relatively small for an adult male, but the calories were enough, and it was easy to feel full after eating too much for dinner. After dinner, Lin Shirshu put the tableware on the table into the kitchen. Nan Yen sat on the sofa and watched TV. After Lin Shirshu finished the rest of the things, he took out a can of cold beer from the refrigerator. Lin Shirshu sat on the sofa, opened the beer in his hand, and took a few sips. Nan Yen naturally went over and rested her head on her boyfriend's shoulder. She noticed that this man didn't eat much tonight. Maybe he was in a bad mood. When he was in a bad mood, his appetite became not so good. Lin Shirshu just sat on the sofa, wearing a white shirt, and his figure looked a little thin. But he doesn't look thin. After all, he is so tall, and he also exercises. Nan Yen once touched his abdominal muscles when she was bullying someone. To be honest, this man might be a Winshio type of man. Lin Shirshu's figure is still very well maintained, perhaps because he studied medicine. He pays more attention to physical health than ordinary people, so he goes running to exercise when he gets up early. In addition, it is no exaggeration to say that his life-threatening quirks and habits are not useless. At least they make his body look quite beautiful and strong. The girlfriend leaning on Lin Shirshu moved her hands and feet, and slowly, she began to behave unruly. At first, she was quite restrained, only pinching her boyfriend's face a few times. And slowly, her hands began to move down, touching and pinching her boyfriend's waist, as if she treated him as a human toy, obviously with a fresh and curious look. Under normal circumstances, the boyfriend would definitely hold the unruly claws and stop the other party's shameless behavior of taking advantage. But tonight, I don't know if he was in a bad mood, and he didn't reach out to stop her. Not only that, this person refused to wear clothes properly. It was originally a thin white shirt, and the buttons were not buttoned properly. The collar was loosened a few times, and the slightest movement revealed the smooth skin below the neck and a sharp collarbone. Nan Yen crawled over and giggled, taking the opportunity to touch, pinch and hug this person and take advantage of him. But she didn't dare to take any further actions. Anyway, she was a coward. After touching her boyfriend, she kissed him twice on the face as compensation. When she stopped, Lin Shirshu turned his head to look at his girlfriend beside him. He asked her in a low voice, "Are you not going to continue?" Nan Yen smiled and lay on him. "Am I the kind of shameless person?" Lin Shirshu couldn't help laughing. He stretched out his hand to hug his girlfriend's waist. The girl's body was light and soft, and there was a faint fragrance. Not only was it not uncomfortable, but it made people inexplicably want her to stick closer. Would you like some wine? The slender fingers slowly handed over the beer in their hands. The slightly white fingertips were frozen by the temperature of the can. Nan Yen looked at his hand. Under the light blue veins on the back of his hand could be clearly seen. Nan Yen watched him drink a few more sips of beer. She looked at him again, and still felt that something was wrong with this man tonight. So she reached out and tugged at his collar. Did you encounter any troubles today? Why do you always look unhappy? Lin Shirshu frowned, as if thinking. Then he nodded and looked into her eyes. I am a little troubled. Can you help me solve it? Nan Yen asked him doubtfully. Solve what? Lin Shirshu lowered his head and said nothing. He reached out and held Nan Yen's fingers. The obviously cold, distinct knuckles wrapped around her palm. When Nan Yen was about to pull out, she heard this man lower his head and say, a little physiological problem. At first Nan Yen didn't react, but when she understood what this man meant, her eyes suddenly widened and she looked at him in disbelief. Nan Yan's cheeks flushed slightly, and she subconsciously patted the back of the man's hand. Why are you talking about this? Lin Shirshu thought about it and didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand and covered it. He could feel the other's body temperature through the thin layer of cloth. He pressed that position and said, because this place has always been uncomfortable. I tried it several times, and there was no big difference. Can you help me solve it? Nan Yen. Nan Yen was really impressed by this man's shamelessness. He looked so serious and pure. But he had no moral integrity when he spoke. The key point was that when he said such improper words, his expression was still so serious, and his tone was as casual as if he was telling her what he had for dinner today. Lin Shirshu was determined to have something happen tonight, but he didn't want to force the other party. So he asked the other party's wishes. He saw Yan Yan's face was slightly red, and there was a trace of astonishment in her dark and clear eyes, as if she was a little unbelievable. What's so unbelievable about this? After all, he is a man, and all men have this idea. He doesn't think there is anything shameful about it. But seeing that she didn't react for a long time, Lin Shirshu pursed his lips and smiled. He didn't feel too embarrassed or anything strange. He just asked again. Didn't you understand what I said? Lin Shirshu didn't believe that Yan Yan didn't feel it. She just didn't say it. What? The two were so close that their skins were almost touching. Lin Shirshu lowered his head and smelled the faint fragrance on her body. He lowered his voice and said concisely, Don't you want to sleep with me? You have always wanted to do those things to me. Dr. Lin's voice became lower and lower. His lips pressed against Nan Yan's cheek, and every word he said seemed to have a hook. His eyes looked at her, and his long eyelashes were like a small brush. When they fluttered gently, it seemed to hook out some emotions hidden in people's bones, and hook people to pieces. Now, what do you want to see? Watch me masturbate? It's not impossible. But I don't usually masturbate, so it may not be as interesting as you think, he said, holding his girlfriend's hand and putting it on the belt buckle. This statement shocked her three views, and Nan Yan's head was buzzing. Even though she was thick-skinned enough, she couldn't help blushing after hearing such a fierce word. This guy is much more coquettish than her, pure and reserved. How come she didn't realize that he was so frivolous before? Lin Shirshu also remembered the requests Yan Yan had made before. In fact, he always felt that it would not be too late to do those things after the relationship was more stable. He liked the gradual process. But now, he felt that it was not impossible to enjoy life in time. So, the current situation is the opposite. No, don't do this. Don't you feel ashamed? What is there to be ashamed of? Lin Shirshu laughed softly. It was just human nature. Nan Yen reached out and pushed the man's shoulder, blushing and suddenly reserved. If she didn't know this man's abnormality until now, she would have been in vain for so long. Isn't it a bit too fast? I'm not ready. Lin Shirshu lowered his head and kissed her cheek with a hot and sticky kiss. His lips rubbed against his girlfriend's earlobe gently. His deliberately low voice was like rubbing Nan Yan's bottom line on the ground. Why? You backed off when the time came? He was very proactive this time. Nan Yan watched his movements, and her eyes unconsciously fell on his fingers. The hand was moderately thick and thin and slender, with knuckles bent and falling on the buttons of the collar. The movement was neither fast nor slow, but it revealed a sense of agility. He took off his clothes quickly, one by one, and soon his entire chest was exposed, following the direction of the unbuttoning. What came into view was a thin waist with fair skin. The slender fingers were placed on the belt buckle at the waist. With 2 fingers gently flicking, a click sound was heard, and the belt buckle was successfully unbuttoned. He reached out to hold Nan Yan's fingers again, his palm against her skin, and the temperature that did not belong to her body was also transmitted to him. Nan Yan could clearly feel that his finger, which was originally cold, was now warm. The tall figure was silent for a moment, and then leaned towards her. At this moment, Lin Shirshu's eyes were quiet, and a few strands of slightly longer hair fell down at some point, loosely hanging on his eyebrows, making him look indescribably depressed. In the end, his expression changed. His eyelashes drooped slightly, and his eyes looked at people with desire, deep and shallow, and he seemed to have become a different person. He touched Nan Yan's lips with his finger, and seeing that this man was still stiff and stupid, he suddenly chuckled and asked her, "Do you want to kiss?" This naked seduction scene was purely to stimulate people's adrenaline. How could Nan Yan not be dumb and stiff? This man was flirting, and she had nothing to do with him. Stripping and seducing were just trivial matters. The most important thing was the words he said, and the serious look when he said those words. His calm and rational face made her think that she was doing something serious. Nan Yan hesitated and stepped back. As a result, she just stepped back an inch, and was grabbed by the boyfriend opposite, and then pulled back. Her upper body was unstable, and she accidentally bumped into his chest, and her nose was hit and hurt. This time, she fell into a trap. Lin Shirshu grabbed his girlfriend's shoulders. His fingers pressed her back vaguely, hesitated, then lowered his head and kissed her. His kiss was not heavy, but Nan Yan could feel a suffocating feeling. This kiss was almost drowning her. What else could she say now? I can only say, this guy is really coquettish. Chapter 233. This kiss was long and lasting. It was simply an attempt to murder her. Nan Yan felt that this man was treating her like Tang Monk's flesh, kissing her so hard that she was in a state of confusion, unable to live or die. Her brain slowly went blank, and her body naturally went limp, almost unable to breathe. Nan Yan could only open her misty eyes and stare at his eyelashes dimly. Dr. Lin's eyelashes were long and dense, but not curly, but long and straight, like 2 small brushes pressing small shadows on the skin under his eyes. He was such a serious person at ordinary times, with a sense of abstinence that could not be described. But he did this kind of thing without hesitation, and his whole body was full of no bottom line. After Dr. Lin finished kissing, he did not let go. He still held her head and rubbed his chin against the top of her head. Perhaps he did not kiss enough, so he lowered his head and nibbled her lips twice. Nan Yan now feels like a pet cat being rubbed on the sofa. But Dr. Lin doesn't keep cats and doesn't like to keep cats. There's nothing he can do. Dr. Lin doesn't like any creature that sheds hair. As a cat owner, Nan Yan felt that she was full of unclean breath after being ruthlessly ravaged by the shit shoveler. This reminded Nan Yan of the last time she pestered him to keep a puppy at home, but was rejected by Dr. Lin in a principled way. Later, when he saw that she was unhappy, he came to coax her again and said that if you really want to keep a pet, you can keep a lizard or a small snake. These pets don't shed hair and won't run around. Nan Yan was so angry that she rushed up to bite him to vent her anger. Is keeping a dog the same as keeping a lizard? This man's brain circuit is different from that of normal people. When Dr. Lin finally kissed enough, Nan Yan also heard his slightly rapid breathing, which made Nan Yan realize that Dr. Lin was not as calm and rational as he looked. Nan Yan first saw his eyelashes fluttering slightly, and then some trembling breathing sounds squeezed out of his lungs. This was an instinctive reaction of the body, not because of resistance, but from some unprecedented desire naturally generated from the body. His panting sound was neither high nor low, and he was intentionally or unintentionally suppressed. The low and hoarse voice was simply challenging her proud self-control. Nan Yan was really worried that she would not be able to control herself and directly push him down on the sofa and do it directly. You seem to be a little useless. Yan Yan, you are the only one who is useful. Why kiss if you are useless? Nan Yan happened to meet his eyes. This man dared to laugh at her. Lin Shirshu looked down at his girlfriend, who was still trapped on the sofa cushion by him. He moved his palm and moved a little closer. His warm fingers were about to touch her waistline. Nan Yan finally came to her senses. She took a deep breath and slapped his hand away. Her face was abnormally red because of the excessive suffocation. Nan Yin finally couldn't help but stare at him. Her eyes were round and black, watery and misty after being bullied. Why weren't you like this before? He wasn't like this before because he wasn't angry. He is like this now because he is really angry. Because of what she said in the hospital. But he didn't want to say it now because it would interfere with what he would do next. Lin Shirshi was not angry when his hand was slapped away. But Yin Yin did not allow him to touch him. So he could only let her touch him. Lin Shirshi took his girlfriend's hand and put it on his waist. It must be said that Dr. Lin has a really good figure. With tight muscles and fair skin. He is the type that normal people would like. His thin shirt buttons had been unbuttoned long ago. As soon as Nan Yin put her hand on it, she felt a handful of smooth flesh. His body temperature was also high, but it was obviously lower than the temperature of her palm. When she put it on it, Nan Yin only felt that she touched a piece of cold silk. Her hand trembled, and she really couldn't hold back the little restlessness in her heart. She simply reached out and touched it twice, then withdrew her hand uprightly and pushed the man away. She was definitely not the kind of woman without morals and integrity. This dogman should not try to seduce her. Lin Shirshi was amused by her pretending to be reserved. He held Nan Yan's wrist and pressed her against the sofa cushion behind him. He touched her ear with his other hand and rubbed her earlobe with his 2 thumbs, making her skin red. He lowered his head and looked at her, his eyes dark and smiling. Why did you stop? Don't you like it? I should be able to do it after practicing. If you like, you can touch me at will. Anywhere. Tonight. You can do whatever you want in the future. Don't you want to play? Any action can satisfy you. Why are you hiding? As he spoke, Nan Yin backed away with a red face. But there was a sofa cushion behind her. Even if she tried her best to shrink back, she couldn't get an inch away from the man in front of her. She thought to herself, how could she not hide? She felt that this man was clearly seducing her openly, and he was simply challenging her bottom line. Nan Yin felt that her heart was trembling when she heard that. And this man was holding her hand and pressing it against her body. Nan Yin now discovered a naked reality. That is, Dr. Lin has no shame. And he is very shameless when he is shameless. Absolutely explosive. Nan Yin wanted to struggle, but was pressed down on the sofa by this man. And she couldn't move. She couldn't resist at all. And after being suppressed back and forth like this, she found that Dr. Lin was quite enjoying it. Probably treating their actions as a little fun between lovers. Pure and unpretentious. Nan Yin couldn't hold it anymore. Especially when she felt the pressure from someone under her. She couldn't help but glare at him. Lin Shirshi. Are you serious? This made Lin Shirshi pause for a few seconds. And then he looked up at her. Dr. Lin was probably wondering why she asked such a question even though she knew the answer. Wasn't he obvious enough? He stood up, put one hand on the side of his girlfriend's head, careful not to press her hair, and then looked down at his girlfriend. The sofa was so small. And he bent his legs and got closer. In an instant, their arms were against their arms, and legs were against their legs. Lin Shirshi bent his knees, and with a little force on his long legs, he pushed them between his girlfriend's knees. The intimacy between the two was completely negative. Of course it's true. Otherwise? Do you think I'm kidding you? Or do you think I'm bored and have the time to popularize sex knowledge with you? Nan Yin. Lin Shirshi saw her eyes wide open, with a look of disbelief on his face. Nan Yin thought he was possessed by a ghost. And the ghost was probably a pervert who stole the beauty of women. The man's little movements did not stop. One hand touched her ankle at some point, rubbing it back and forth, making Nan Yin's ankle itchy. She couldn't help but kicked it, which was probably sending a sheep into the tiger's mouth. Dr. Lin directly reached out and held the kicking calf. The cold, bony palms touched the knees, and with some unspeakable meaning, they seemed to pass over the knees, then patted and pressed a few times. This situation made Nan Yin directly hallucinate the state of herself when she was sick and was getting an injection in the hospital with saline drips. Doctors also habitually pat people like this, especially Dr. Lin's calm posture, which was very similar to the professional and cold attitude of doctors when giving injections. Nan Yin felt that it was really exciting. If he took a stethoscope, it would be even more like that. Then, Dr. Lin probably let himself go completely. He opened his knees without hesitation and wrapped them around his body. Dr. Lin, who had no sense of shame, was completely perverted. He looked down at his girlfriend on the sofa, who was gentle and polite. and still maintained his remaining demeanor. He was not in a hurry this time. He looked down at his girlfriend's embarrassed face with red eyes, and then held her face and kissed her again. This kiss was just enough. And then he made his words clearer. I want you to help me. I want to do something closer with you. If you still don't understand, I want to insert it. Do you understand enough? Is it okay? Nan Yin was really impressed by this man's lack of bottom line. She wondered if he could not speak so bluntly, without any reserve or subtlety. It made her head buzz, just like the alarm sound of a kettle boiling. Nan Yin felt that her brain was really going to crash. Her head was full of waste thoughts, which filled up her remaining rationality. She didn't dare to think any deeper. The cunning dog man. He was really good at being coquettish. Nan Yin hadn't said a word yet, but this man had already started to choose a venue. He stuck to her and asked, "Where do you want to go? The sofa or the bedroom? Anywhere is fine. In addition to this, we can try what you like in the future." Nan Yin's brain hadn't reacted to this, and she subconsciously said, Go to the room." She regretted it as soon as she finished speaking. What sofa and bed? When did she agree? This dog man took advantage of her and started to play tricks when her head was dizzy. You are shameless. Nan Yin couldn't help but curse. But Lin Shershi was not affected by her, and still carried her into the bedroom steadily. On the way in, he took off his shirt and threw it all over the floor, as well as his tie. At this time, Dr. Lin's obsessive-compulsive disorder and misophobia had long been thrown to some corner. Now all his attention was on his girlfriend in his arms. He kissed her so hard that she wanted to live but couldn't, and her heart was throbbing. She couldn't say a word, but finally couldn't help but obey. If she didn't obey, this man would probably come up with more tricks. Dr. Lin is worthy of being Dr. Lin. Although he lacks practical experience, he is extremely rich in theoretical knowledge and knows a little bit about everything, especially about men and women. He has no shame and likes to ask questions without shame. He likes to lean close to her ear and ask in a hurried voice, "Is this okay?" What the hell? Nan Yin almost cursed it out loud, but her scolding was not obvious. It sounded like sobbing, which made people feel soft. Get away. Get away is impossible. Not only did Dr. Lin not get away, he wanted to go further and really push his luck. Nan Yin was really tortured this time. When she felt uncomfortable, she started crying. When she cried, she attacked indiscriminately. She grabbed his shoulders with both hands and scratched them hard. Finally, she got so angry that she just bit him with her teeth. People who didn't know would think they were fighting. Dr. Lin was also a little uncomfortable. His rapid breathing sprayed on people's ears, which was tingling and vaguely itchy, especially because he had a faint scent of shower gel on him. He was such a serious person at ordinary times. When he wore a white coat, he was cold and abstinent. His hands were also thin and slender, with distinct finger bones. As a result, they were used to hold her wrist tightly and unable to move. In the end, he was even more shameless. He said in a low voice beside her ear, "Look at me. Open your eyes and look at me. Okay? Look at how I do it. Do you like it? Yin, do you like me doing this to you? It doesn't matter if you don't like it. I don't mind. Anyway, I will use Mi Qingye to block this position." When he said this, his breath became heavier, and a layer of red appeared at the end of his eyes. His thin lips pursed, then slightly opened, and exhaled lightly. His lips became redder, and it seemed that he was about to be congested. Finally, his palm pressed gently against her abdomen and whispered, "It's right here." As a doctor, Lin Shershi found the spot accurately and pointed it out shamelessly. Nan Yin couldn't help but bite it in the end, as if to block the lips that kept uttering some vulgar words, so that he could no longer make any sound. Damn, this is really exciting. In the end, the guy's operation had made Nan Yin doubt her life, but she had to admit that she really enjoyed it, and the consequence was kidney deficiency. At least Nan Yin felt that she would be weak for a while. This dog man looked very thin and frail, but he was actually very strong, especially when he went crazy. He was simply not a human. It was not until noon the next day that Nan Yin woke up. Her voice was a little hoarse. She must have felt uncomfortable, but there was also pain and happiness. After all, it was the first time for both of them, and they were still a little unskilled in running in. No matter how great Dr. Lin is, he is a novice driver without a license, and he stumbles and falls. In addition, Nan Yin acts as if she is in great pain when she feels a little uncomfortable, and cries miserably. Dr. Lin looks calm, but he is still a little unsure. In the end, he has no choice but to coax her and restrain herself. After coaxing her for half a night, it finally ends successfully. When Nan Yin wakes up, there is no one beside her. The air conditioner in the room is just right. Not too cold or too hot. She touches herself and finds that she is wearing a thin nightgown, which Dr. Lin mercifully puts on her after giving her a bath in the middle of the night. She rolls around in the quilt twice before reaching for the phone on the bedside table and turning it on. It's already 11:30. Luckily, I don't have to go to work today. Thinking of what happened last night, Nan Yin didn't have time to think about it. Now that she thought about it, the man had clearly planned it in advance. On the one hand, he coaxed her not to go to the restaurant. And on the other hand, he coaxed her to cook for her in person, paralyzing her vigilance. However, she also had some guesses about Dr. Lin's sudden abnormality. After all, he was not like this under normal circumstances. She guessed that the man really knew what she said to Zhou Yuyu in the hospital. Nan Yin didn't think that he heard it on the spot. At most, she thought that it might be Zhou Yuyu who told him. Otherwise, this man wouldn't be so fierce and fierce. Speaking of the fierceness, Nan Yin turned over and sat up, looking around. The clothes that were originally scattered on the floor were all put away. It was obvious that her boyfriend must have cleaned them up. Nan Yin sat on the bed and doubted her life. Her throat was hoarse and uncomfortable now. There was no way. It would be strange if she didn't cry and shout last night. Fortunately, she didn't want to talk now. But after looking around, she didn't see Dr. Lin. Nor did she hear any other people's movements. Nan Yin was a little confused this time. Why did this person run away after sleeping? She lifted the thin quilt and was about to go out to take a look. But she found that her slippers were still outside. Nan Yin was about to jump out of bed barefoot when she heard footsteps at the door. Dr. Lin, wearing daily home clothes, came in with a glass of freshly made pear juice. He looked completely different from last night. His hair was not well groomed, and a few strands of it fell loosely beside his eyebrows. He walked towards Nan Yin, handed her the pear juice in his hand, and said in a very gentle manner, "Drink this first. Your throat may be a little uncomfortable. I just made it for you." Nan Yin looked at him and took it obediently. After drinking it, her throat was indeed moistened a lot. She sat on the bed without moving. The nightgown was not long enough, and her two bare legs were exposed when she sat there. She was a little unhappy and stepped on his knees directly. "Where are my slippers?" While talking, she stretched out her hand to grab Dr. Lin's collar and pushed his head down hard. The two white arms shook Dr. Lin's eyes. It's a pity that he can't do anything too extreme recently. I guess his girlfriend will be on guard against him during this period. Lin Shirshu held him up and couldn't help kissing him on the forehead. Nan Yin felt hot. And then she was carried into the bathroom and sat on the stool. "It should be on the sofa. I'll get it for you. Wash up first, and then come out to have breakfast." Why eat breakfast at 11:30? Nan Yin didn't want to correct this man's mistake. She just felt her legs were a little weak, and she was still floating when she walked. It was all because of this man's cruelty. This time she was knocked down. He was not allowed to touch her for at least half a month. After she finished washing up, the breakfast outside was indeed ready. It should be a takeaway. It was all light food, and there were also a few desserts and cut fruits. Nan Yin was dragged to exercise all night, and her stomach was empty at this time. She felt that she was so hungry that she could eat a cow. She walked to the dining table and sat down next to Lin Shirshu. Nan Yin took a bite of the braised spare ribs, and it smelled delicious and tasted even better. Lin Shirshu beside her peeled a shrimp ball and handed it to her. Nan Yin bit it gently with his fingers, and it tasted good. She ate it slowly and happily. Lin Shirshu was talking to her while feeding her, but he ate very little. Nan Yin seriously suspected that this man had gotten up in the middle of the night and had taken a shot of chicken blood. How could he not be hungry after doing so much work? She also heard Lin Shirshu ask her, "Do you like forest-style things?" Forest-style? This made Nan Yin feel a little strange, but she didn't think much about it. She couldn't handle forest-style clothes. She shook her head at this man. "I don't like it. It doesn't look good." As he said that, he picked up a piece of duck neck and handed it to her. She wanted to see what Dr. Lin looked like when he ate the duck neck. Dr. Lin really gave her face and picked it up and ate 2 bites. Then asked her again, What do you like? Do you like beach-style ones? This time Nan nodded. Not bad. I like beautiful ones. Yes. Girls like beautiful and dreamy ones. He saw some ocean-style weddings with lights, which were indeed beautiful, very ornamental, and unforgettable. Lin Shirshu thought for a moment and said, My parents love traveling. They should be traveling abroad recently. I don't know which country they are in, but they should be preparing to return recently. It may take about a week to arrive in China. I have time. Can I take you home to meet them next week? As soon as she finished speaking, the bones in Nan Yan's mouth immediately lost their fragrance. When she moved her chopsticks, the piece of fresh and fragrant ribs of moderate size fell into the soup, splashing a little soup, and a few drops fell on the back of her boyfriend's hand. Lin Shirshu calmly took out a tissue to wipe it clean, and looked at his girlfriend next to him. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? What else is inappropriate? Does he have the nerve to ask? It's obvious that everything is inappropriate. This attitude is very different. Nan Yin turned her head and looked at Dr. Lin beside her. Isn't this development a bit too fast? She is only 24 years old, a student who has just entered the society. Isn't it a bit inappropriate to meet her parents so soon? Is this man not very clear-headed? Nan Yin couldn't hold it anymore. She drank a sip of water tactically and turned to ask him, Why do you want to meet your parents? Perhaps seeing that Nan Yan's attitude was a bit resistant, Lin Shirshu slowed down his voice and coaxed her slowly. Don't worry. It's not what you think. I just want to take you to meet my parents first. By the way, don't you like beach and ocean-style weddings? I saw the renderings, and it's really beautiful. If you like it, we can make an appointment first. We don't have to get married so early, but we can get engaged first. Nan Yin, who said she likes beach-style weddings? She obviously likes beach-style skirts. Okay. This dog man didn't even speak clearly. Nan Yin now knew what he was up to. To be honest, this speed was even faster than riding a rocket. Normal people would not be able to bear it. Not to mention that they had only been together for such a short time. Less than 3 months. It would be strange if they could accept it. Nan Yin directly confronted him. She had no appetite for food. She took a few sips of the juice beside her before saying, I don't like it. And I don't want to meet your parents so soon. Why did you suddenly bring up this matter? Isn't it good for the two of us to be together? Lin Shirshu frowned, turned his head, and looked at her again, his voice still gentle and calm. It's just a small ceremony to confirm the relationship. I just think that our relationship can change a little. If you don't like something, we can discuss it slowly. Nan Yin pursed her lips and glared at him. But I don't like anything. She was unwilling to cooperate. Lin Shirshu frowned again, this time more deeply than before, as if he had encountered something troubling. But soon he relaxed again. He tried to slow down his tone to comfort her and said, I know what you are worried about. I am not forcing you to marry me now. It's just an engagement. Young people nowadays are more likely to accept the engagement ceremony. This is a closer relationship than a couple, but not to the extent of marriage. I didn't make this request on impulse. And my view on marriage is not so casual. I know this is a matter between two families, but I am confident that I can handle those things. I am currently financially independent, with a stable income and certain assets, which are enough to support both of us. His thoughts are the result of rational thinking, and there may be some thoughts of wanting to confirm the relationship, but it is not the kind of selfish thoughts that want to tie her up as soon as possible on impulse. Lin Shirshu thought about it and continued. In addition, I think marriage is to combine two independent and complete personalities together, not one party becoming an appendage of the other. You can have your own work in life. We can rely on each other. What it was like before marriage will be the same after marriage. I will not force you to do anything you don't like. Lin Shirshu was not being polite when he said these words. He really thought so. After all, marriage is not something that can be achieved overnight. He could understand her uneasiness, because no matter how much he promised, girls always pay more in the process of establishing a marriage. However, even if he promised again and again, Nan Yin still refused to accept it. Too fast. I'm not ready yet. Lin Shirshu listened to these consecutive sentences, all of which were rejected without hesitation. His originally stable mood became a little depressed. She seemed to have not even considered it, and she didn't even have a legitimate reason. She directly denied everything he said. This made Lin Shirshu have to wonder if she had never thought about being with him at all. After all, he still remembered what she said in the hospital. He had tried his best to ignore the irritation caused by those words. But now, those emotions came out again. Lin Shirshu didn't speak anymore. The atmosphere after dinner suddenly became a little dull. After Lin Shirshu cleaned up the tableware, he sat on the sofa in the living room alone. He never took the initiative to speak again, and the expression on his face looked a little cold. The boyfriend was angry. Nan Yin walked over holding the box of washed melons on the table. She walked to the sofa and sat down next to Dr. Lin. Her boyfriend beside her ignored her and didn't even look at her. He took a magazine and read it. Nan Yin guessed that this guy didn't read it carefully. After all, he didn't turn the page for a long time. She poked a piece of melon with a toothpick and ate it herself. The crisp sound of teeth biting the melon suddenly became particularly obvious in the quiet room. Lin Shirshu couldn't help but look at her. This melon was cut by him just now. Didn't she notice that her boyfriend was still unhappy when she was eating the melon? She ate so happily, and she was not afraid of being full. Lin Shirshu retracted his gaze, looked at the back of his hand again, and turned his gaze back to the melon-eating crowd beside him. The hand suddenly reached out and rubbed against her skirt, pushing the man away, and then said coldly, "Stay away from me. Your saliva is splashing on my hand." Nan Yin couldn't help laughing this time, and insisted on getting close to him, and even put her arms around his shoulders, rubbed her head against his chin, tilted her face up and leaned over to kiss him, and asked, "Are you angry?" Chapter 234. Lin Shirshu looked at her. Wasn't it normal for him to be angry? Her unwillingness to go home with him to meet his parents meant that she had never thought about the future of the two of them, let alone getting engaged to him. He admitted that he might be a little impatient, but she refused so decisively and refused to give a legitimate reason. He was unhappy in his heart. Couldn't he be angry? To be honest, he still didn't know her true thoughts. He didn't know whether she was with him to coax him or was sincere, or whether it was like what she said in the hospital. From beginning to end, it was just because he had been with Zhou Yu before, and because he wanted revenge. So he was with him. Some things can't stand thinking about them, because the more you think about them, the angrier you get. Now, facing his girlfriend's dogskin plaster like rogue scene, Lin Shirshu ignored it, and his expression didn't change much. He lowered his head and said coldly, "Don't you like it? Why are you holding it so tightly?" Nan Yin looked at this man pretending to be cold. She leaned over again, half of her head resting on her boyfriend's shoulder, and with the other hand, she poked a piece of melon with a toothpick and handed it to his mouth, smiling gently and harmlessly, and began to coax him in a proper manner. "Who said I don't like it? Do you want to eat it? It's very sweet." The girlfriend's tone of coaxing was soft and gentle. Perhaps it was because she heard her say the word like that Lin Shirshu's mood finally calmed down a little. He lowered his head to look at his girlfriend's gentle and considerate appearance, and felt that she was not so conscienceless. At least she knew how to coax him. So he lowered his head and bit the piece of melon into his mouth. Nan Yin was satisfied now. Although she refused to give this person a name, she was thick-skinned and could say something even if she was wrong. Moreover, she was not completely wrong in the current situation. It was obviously his own fault. He was just thinking about taking a step further after just one night's sleep. Dr. Lin's thoughts, which were as fast as a rocket, simply rubbed her brain on the ground. Nan Yin showed an expression of wanting to say something but stopping, trying to look aggrieved and forbearing. Her expression changed again, and she immediately looked like a sad face. But her eyes were still looking at people sincerely. "Dear, you have to understand me." Lin Shirshu's expression was really hard to describe. He was almost ruined by the word dear. Then he looked down at her fake expression of misery, and finally managed to stabilize his emotions. She doesn't understand others, and wants others to understand her. How can there be such a good reason in this world? Nan Yin didn't care if her acting was fake. As long as the feelings were there, it would be fine. She buried her head in her boyfriend's neck and continued to say aggrievedly, "Don't you think about it? We have only been together for a short time. We don't know many things yet. I don't know what your real personality is like. It's not that I don't care about you, but I'm really worried that it will be embarrassing in the future." After saying this, her eyes turned red and her nose twitched slightly. She really looked like she had suffered a great grievance. Lin Shirshu frowned slightly when he heard this. He was actually a relatively rational person. Even when he had a conflict with his girlfriend, he would not blindly push the problem onto the other party. He might not be able to control his emotions when he was angry, but he would start to reflect on his own problems after calming down. His attitude softened now, and he whispered, It's just an engagement. It won't change anything. And he won't have too many requirements and restrictions on her. Lin Shirshu said, as he put his arm around his girlfriend's shoulders, so that she could lean on him more comfortably. He wasn't actually angry. But he was a little concerned about her attitude of rejecting him without thinking. Maybe she could give him a reason that could convince him. After all, he wasn't the kind of unreasonable person. Lin Shirshu saw that she seemed to be really aggrieved. Her eyes were slightly red, and the corners of her eyes were misty. So he reached out and gently wiped under her eyes. But he wiped for a long time without wiping out a single tear. Nan Yin saw that his attitude softened. So she continued to coax him. There's nothing I can do about it. There are some things I really can't accept now. It's not like I don't want to be with you. Do you really want me to do something so difficult? Lin Shirshu lowered his head and said nothing. His face was still indifferent. And people couldn't tell what he was thinking. The two fingers were still gently rubbing the skin around her eye sockets. Not fast or slow. Gently rubbing. And only let go when the skin was slightly red. Maybe he had expected it. In fact, he also knew that Yin Yin might not agree to this matter. He just wanted to try it out and see her reaction. Maybe she would agree. But she refused too quickly, which made him fall into some kind of unpleasant and depressed mood. In the final analysis, this is actually a matter of attitude. She coaxed people so softly and aggrievedly, and Lin Shirshu thought about it, and it seemed that it was not unacceptable. After all, she had coaxed him like this. You have to let us spend more time together. Although you promise very well now. Who knows if you will regret it one day? What should I do when you leave me alone? This is actually a bit unreasonable. After all, no one can predict what will happen in the future. And feelings need to be maintained by both parties. But who let this person's request scare people? Lin Shirshu was not angry after hearing this. In fact, he was not that angry anymore. Maybe she coaxed him well. Dr. Lin had a calm face. He pinched her fingers and rubbed them gently in his palm. He felt that this hand was very soft and good to touch. Then Nan Yin saw that this person took out a small silver ring from somewhere and put it on her middle finger. The small silver ring looked pretty good on her slender and white fingers. Nan Yin was very curious. She pulled her hand back and touched the ring. It was a normal couple's ring style. She touched his fingers. But this person's hands were bare, and he didn't wear anything. Nan Yin asked, "What about yours?" Lin Shirshu didn't answer him. He suddenly lowered his head and kissed her neck and sniffed twice. While Nan Yin was still curiously touching the ring, he said, "Did you put anything on your body? It smells a little sweet." "Very nice." Dr. Lin changed his posture and turned slightly to the side. His home clothes were loose, and the buttons were not buttoned to the top. The collar was slightly open. With this movement, a small silver ring slipped out from his neck. Nan Yin could see the ring hanging on his neck as soon as she looked up. And the red marks on his collarbone were all bitten by her last night. If she didn't know, she would have thought she abused him last night. Seeing the ring on his neck, Nan Yin suddenly realized that Dr. Lin was not allowed to wear jewelry in his profession. He didn't even wear a watch. But it was good to hang it around his neck. At least it wouldn't be lost easily. Lin Shirshu kept sniffing her neck. Nan Yin felt itchy on her neck because of his breath. She pushed his head away and smelled herself. She didn't smell any fragrance. It was just the smell of normal shower gel. She used the same brand as him. She pointed to the melon on the coffee table and asked him, "Is it the smell of melon? Didn't you eat enough?" She poked a piece of fruit with a toothpick and handed it to him. Lin Shirshu shook his head. He still held the person in his arms. With one hand, he lifted the hair on her neck. His chin rested on her shoulder. He could kiss the skin on her neck by lowering his head. He whispered, "It doesn't smell like melon. And it's different from the smell on me. It smells good." Nan Yin was even more puzzled. She raised her arm and sniffed it in front of her nose. She didn't smell anything. She reached out and patted the man's face. Then shook her head. "Is there something wrong with your nose? Why can't I smell anything?" Lin Shirshu didn't explain or respond. Just when Nan Yin was still wondering what the smell was, the man probably let himself go completely. He suddenly lowered his head and licked Nan Yin's neck gently. The wet and soft touch startled Nan Yin, and she almost slapped him. Damn! How did this pervert become like a dog and start licking people? And licking people's necks? When did he pay so little attention to hygiene? What do you want to do? Nan Yin quickly pushed the man's head away and stepped back. This bastard was not honest at all. He was thinking about doing something dirty again. She would not be seduced by him this time. Dr. Lin saw her alert and angry look, and suddenly couldn't help but chuckled. Nothing. He grabbed her back and hugged her in his arms, lowered his head to smell the light fragrance in her hair, and rubbed his straight nose against the skin behind her neck. Dr. Lin thought in his heart that her flesh was so soft as if it had no bones, which made him reluctant to bite it, so he could only lick it. He didn't quite know why he had this impulse. Maybe he couldn't help it. Lin Shirshu exhaled lightly and felt that his breathing was a little tight. I don't know why. I just want to lick it. Maybe, from a normal person's point of view, this behavior may be a little abnormal. But from a biological point of view, this should be a way to express intimacy. Otherwise you can lick me too. He lowered his head and looked into his girlfriend's eyes. The two looked at each other in silence, and there was a moment of silence in the air. Nan Yin. She is not a dog. Why should she lick? Nan Yin was really speechless now. She just felt that Dr. Lin's strange illness hidden in his bones had come back again. Maybe there was a kind of abnormal attribute that was aroused. Let's say he was abnormal. It was not enough to make trouble for so long last night, and he started to be in heat again early in the morning. Nan Yin pushed the man's head away mercilessly, and Lin Shirshu restrained himself a little. Maybe he didn't think he would have such an unruly day. To be honest, he didn't want to use this method to confirm their relationship. But he was really angry about what she said yesterday, and his way of thinking and ideas to a certain extent determined that he would not tear his face and question her face to face. He didn't want to make things so out of control. But now, he was willing to slow down the pace. I don't want to force you. I just want to make my attitude clear to you. We can adapt slowly and talk about engagement later. He considered it. Is this okay? Chapter 235. Nan Yin nodded when she heard this, kissed his eyelids again, and said in a softer tone, Okay. This person is obviously soft-hearted and easy to coax. Now the remaining dissatisfaction in Lin Shirshu's heart disappeared, and a slight arc appeared at the corner of his mouth. He knew that this was a concession from his girlfriend. Her willingness to coax him showed that she cared about him. Since she cared, it meant that some things could be changed as long as he worked hard. If he kept blaming and complaining, the relationship between the two would inevitably collapse. He didn't want that result, so it was not impossible for both sides to give in. Lin Shirshu touched the black baby's head in his arms with satisfaction. He didn't want to push her too hard at once. Some things were useless. As long as she could be honest, it would be fine. As for what happened in the hospital yesterday, he could just pretend that it didn't happen, as long as he didn't mention it. However, his not mentioning it didn't mean that no one else would want to get close to him. The next morning, Nan Yin just got up from the bedroom and saw the washed man standing in front of the mirror, tying his tie in an orderly manner. His two white and slender fingers were very flexible in tying the knot, and this action looked better than that of ordinary people. When he turned around and saw her, he greeted her naturally. Nan Yin couldn't help but grit her teeth. This man looked gentle and thin. But how could he be so shameless when he was shameless? Especially at night when sleeping. Dr. Lin, who had lost his moral integrity, was even more shameless than her, and had no polite style at all. In the past, he still had a little sense of morality. But when he returned to bed, he didn't care about his manners at all, and he really let himself go. This also made Nan Yin clearly realize that men who study medicine should not be provoked, and it was simply fatal to provoke them. However, Nan Yin saw him tidying up his clothes. Dr. Lin usually wears a tie, but not so formally. It is rare to see him so fully armed. She walked to the bathroom door, looked at the time on the wall, rubbed her sleepy eyes, walked over, and leaned her head on her boyfriend's shoulder. Why did you get up so early today? Isn't it Sunday? Can't you sleep a little longer? Lin Shirshu reached out and pulled her into his arms. He didn't finish tying his tie yet, but he lowered his head and kissed her head. Did I wake you up? I have to go on duty today. You can sleep a little longer. I will prepare breakfast for you later. Lin Shirshu looked at her confused state, thought about it, and couldn't help but say, Also, don't worry too much about what I told you yesterday. Just do it as usual. Anyway, he will take practical action. Nan Yin reached out to grab his tie. His words were obviously a bit redundant. In fact, she didn't bother about what he said yesterday. She was always open-minded. After they talked it out, they fell asleep and slept soundly, knowing that his girlfriend wanted to help him tie his tie. Lin Shirshu also bent down to help her reach his height. After Nan Yin helped him tie his tie, he was hugged and kissed. Not only did his girlfriend not dislike him, but she responded actively. This made Dr. Lin inexplicably feel the urge to not go to work. But this urge was suppressed. Dr. Lin hugged his girlfriend's shoulders, kissed her again and again, and then asked her contentedly what she wanted for breakfast, and he would go down to buy it later. The two were getting close, and a mobile phone rang on the sink next to them. Someone sent him a text message. Lin Shirshu glanced at the name in the note. It was Zhou Yu's name. Dr. Lin looked down at his phone. His expression didn't change much. But when he saw the message, his eyes paused slightly. Lin Shirshu, there is something I want to make clear to you. Lin Shirshu frowned slightly, not knowing what this person meant, nor what she was talking about. To be honest, the two hadn't been in touch for a long time since they broke up last time. Except for the meeting in the hospital yesterday. He didn't want to have too much involvement with her. He always felt that Zhou Yu's eyes looking at him were a little bit wrong. He turned off the screen and ignored it. The other party probably couldn't wait for a reply, so he called directly. Lin Shirshu frowned slightly. But his girlfriend in his arms heard the sound of the phone and asked him, "Who sent you messages and called you so early in the morning? Are you so busy?" Lin Shirshu hung up the phone lightly, patted his girlfriend's back as if to comfort her, and laughed. "It's nothing. Work is always busy on weekends. Don't worry about it." After he finished speaking, he carried his girlfriend, who was not conscious in his arms, to the bed and sat her down, and then told her, "Okay, it's still early. You continue to sleep for a while. I will prepare breakfast. If you are hungry, just get up and heat it up yourself. If you don't have anything to do today, you can watch TV at home. When I get off work, I will come back and take you to dinner. Okay?" Nan Yin nodded and agreed, thinking that this person was really talkative. Maybe people are very sleepy during the morning when they get up. Anyway, Nan Yin is really sleepy now. Not to mention that the two of them had been fooling around for so long last night. It is impossible for a young couple who have just started to have sex not to make a fuss at night. Although they say it seriously, it is not the case in reality. The key is that this person is particularly cooperative, which makes her unable to control herself. Lin Shirshu thought about it and said, "If you are bored, you can send me a message. I will reply to you when I see it." "Got it. Got it. Let's go." Nan Yin felt that this person was as nagging as an old mother. It seemed that he went out to work and never came back. She tilted her head and fell asleep on the pillow. This speed was so fast that Lin Shirshu stopped touching his head. There were still many warm words that he didn't have time to say. It felt like the warmth he had finally shown was fed to the dog's stomach. He wanted to see his girlfriend flirting with him. But this girlfriend didn't give him a chance. Lin Shirshu was speechless for a while. The gentle look on that face was also silent for a rare moment, thinking that this girlfriend was not suitable for such tender treatment. But seeing that this person was really asleep, he still covered the quilt very gently. After leaving the room, Lin Shirshu saw the message sent from his mobile phone again. It was Zhou Yu who asked him to meet at a time and place. He thought about it, and still didn't respond. There was no need to reply. However, his non-response did not mean that the other party would give up. Until noon, after the shift during the lunch break, Lin Shirshu saw Zhou Yu standing at the door when he was about to return to the office. The look she gave him was no different from the previous 2 days, and there was a hint of ridicule and unwillingness. "Are you unwilling to even see me now?" Zhou Yu clenched her fingers. She was unwilling, and there was an inexplicable bitterness in her chest. The colder he was, the more unwilling she was, especially after hearing what Xia Nanyan said. She felt a little complicated in her heart. Maybe she didn't even know what she was thinking now. Lin Shirshu frowned when he heard this, but he finally made an appointment to talk things out. The two met at a nearby cafe. The warm yellow light sprinkled on the brown walls, revealing a quiet atmosphere. After lunch, there were not many customers in the cafe. They each ordered a drink. When the waiter brought the coffee, Lin Shirshu looked up at Zhou Yu opposite him. His eyes were normal, and his voice was not emotional. He asked calmly, "What do you want to talk to me about?" "I have something to do in the afternoon, so I may not have that much time." Zhou Yu looked at his cold and businesslike attitude, and the memories of their time together instantly came to her mind. And a feeling of resentment and hatred was brewing in her chest. She didn't know how she spent this period of time, especially after her rebirth. She had many advantages, But everything didn't go as she expected. She just couldn't accept that he was so cold to her. But accepted a woman who didn't like him at all. Anyone could do it. Why did it have to be Xia Nanyan? Thinking of what Xia Nanyan said in the hospital, Zhou Yuyu's fingers couldn't help but tighten. She suppressed the deep resentment in her heart, and didn't hide the purpose of her coming to him. Do you know why Xia Nanyan was with you? When Zhou Yuyu said this, her tone contained unspeakable sarcasm. Probably thinking that he deserved to be retaliated. Lin Shirshu lowered his head and thought for a while. His voice flat. I remember you told me some time ago that you didn't want me to entangle you. And you didn't want to have any involvement with me. Breaking up is breaking up. What's the point of you telling me this now? Do you think I will believe you and quarrel with my girlfriend? Or do you think this is a good thing for me? He actually didn't quite understand. From the moment Zhou Yuyu broke up, she looked at him with an inexplicable resentment. But he asked himself if he had done anything to let her down. Zhou Yuyu didn't expect Lin Shirshu to think this way. Maybe she felt that she was misunderstood. Her expression was a little unbelievable. Her chest was slightly heaving. And her fingers were clenched. What do you mean by that? What does it mean? In fact, he also wanted to ask her. Even though the two of them had some unpleasantness during the breakup, it was not to the point of never seeing each other again. Why should she care so much about what happened between him and Nan Yin? No matter what the relationship between him and Yin Yin was, it was a matter between two lovers. Once there was a third person, it would only make things more complicated. Moreover, if you really want to do good for someone, would you really gossip about the other person's girlfriend behind their back? Zhou Yuyu's attitude clearly made it clear. If he hadn't heard what Yin Yin said on the spot, and decided not to care about those things, her words would only make the conflict between him and Yin Yin even more irreconcilable. So, he didn't think that she came to him privately for his sake. And he wasn't stupid enough to not see that she was emotionally amiss. Lin Shirshu was silent for a moment, raised his hand to pick up the coffee on the table and took a sip, and continued, I don't believe you can't feel it yourself. From the moment you broke up with me, you have always had an inexplicable resentment towards me in your heart. If you really care about me, you shouldn't say such things to me at this time. Zhou Yuyu, I'm not that stupid. I can't even see this trick. Hearing this, Zhou Yuyu couldn't believe it. Tears welled up in her eyes instantly. Her eyes were red. She tried her best to calm herself down, but she couldn't control the anger in her heart. So, do you think I'm trying to sow discord? Lin Shirshu didn't say anything. Zhou Yuyu was obviously a little excited. Her fingertips were white, without a trace of blood. Are you going to blame me for this? Lin Shirshu, who do you think you are? Why do you say this to me? I just want to remind you that from beginning to end, people are just taking revenge on you and playing with you. Lin Shirshu's face didn't change much. He looked up at the woman opposite, and then looked away. If you came to me today to say these words, then I already know. You don't need to remind me kindly. Is there anything else? If not, then I'll leave first. There's really nothing to say about the hospital incident. He knows everything Yin Yin said. He really cared about it at the beginning. But he didn't want to break up. And the relationship between the two of them has become much closer. So he could only pretend not to know. Zhou Yuyu, who was sitting opposite, didn't seem to expect him to say such a thing. The tears in her eyes gathered deeper and deeper. But she tried hard not to let them fall. What she didn't want most now was to cry in front of Lin Shirshu. But for some reason, no matter how she avoided it, or how she forgot the memories of her previous life, when facing this person, she always had a resentment and unwillingness in her heart. She didn't know whether this person was unwilling to believe her, or trusted Xia Nanyan too much. So he was indifferent when he heard that he was tricked and deceived by his girlfriend from beginning to end. Since he was so lenient and trusting of Xia Nanyan, why couldn't he accommodate her more in his previous life? Zhou Yuyu was stunned for a moment when she thought of this. And then she realized what she really thought deep in her heart. She just hated him. Since her rebirth, her attitude towards Lin Shirshu has contained a hatred. She is not so generous. And she doesn't want him to live better than her. She just wants to take revenge on him from beginning to end. Whether in the last life or this life, she has always hated him. In the last life, she still had the opportunity to speak out those hatreds. But in this life, she didn't even have the position to accuse him. How could she be willing? After Lin Shirshu finished speaking, he was ready to get up. As soon as he looked up, he saw a flash of hatred in Zhou Yuyu's eyes opposite him. Lin Shirshu paused slightly, feeling a little troubled. But seeing that she didn't react, He was about to leave. He just took a step, but heard the person behind him suddenly say, "Don't you want to know why I broke up with you inexplicably?" Her voice with a suppressed voice sounded in her throat. Zhou Yuyu's eyes were fogged up. She looked at Lin Shirshi's profile opposite her. Her expression changed from resentment to weirdness. "Do you think I broke up with you for no reason? Do you think you did nothing wrong in this matter?" After saying this, Zhou Yuyu clenched her fingers and tears fell uncontrollably. Lin Shirshi paused for a moment. He turned his head and looked at Zhou Yuyu behind him. Seeing her raising her head, there seemed to be a trace of strange emotion in her eyes. A kind of undisguised malice, which made Lin Shirshi frown. He didn't know what was the point of her saying this now. They had already broken up. Would talking about the reason change anything? Lin Shirshi thought about it, but still couldn't figure out what her reason was. In the end, he could only calmly say, "It's no use for you to tell me these things now. Things that have been decided cannot be changed no matter how hard you try." Zhou Yuyu's eyes were shining with watery light, and there was a kind of stubborn feeling of breaking the jar. She raised her eyes, and suddenly met his gaze. She said with both sarcasm and regret, "Who said it can't be changed?" "Lin Shirshu. In my memory, Xia Nanyan will eventually marry Ji Yunshin. Do you believe it?" Just 1 year later on the Mid-Autumn Festival, they got engaged first, and then got married. You didn't even know her. Do you think it doesn't matter? When Lin Shirshu heard this, he was stunned at first, then frowned, and then his eyes became cold and his expression became a little serious. He felt that Zhou Yuyu was talking nonsense. "Do you think I will believe you? Let alone Yan Yan will marry Ji Yunshin. They have broken up now. He is her legitimate boyfriend. What does Zhou Yuyu mean by saying this? What does it mean that Yan Yan and Ji Yunshin will get married in her memory? These messy, upside-down memories. Is she stupid? Do you think he will believe it if she says this?" Zhou Yuyu knows that he doesn't believe it. But what if he doesn't believe it? She just wants to say it, to tell all the grievances and resentments hidden deep in her heart. Even if she can't make him believe it, she will plant a nail in his heart. Why is she the only one who cares? Why is she the only one who is wronged? Since she was reborn, the resentment in her heart has nowhere to go. Just because she has more life experiences and memories than others, she is the only one who remembers those things. And she is the only one who cares about those resentments. The pressure she bears is also twice as much as others. Unfortunately, the memories of 2 lifetimes added together are all chaotic, without any beautiful things. If you don't believe it, someone will. Do you think Ji Yunshin will believe what I say? Will Xia Nanyan believe it? Lin Shirshu's face turned completely cold. He didn't know why she was so sure, but he just felt something was wrong. Zhou Yuyu stared at him. During the time after her rebirth, she always felt that these things were the biggest secrets of her life, and she might not tell anyone in her life. But now she was thinking, why is she the only one who remembers it? If possible, why can't she tell this matter? Even if she can't change anything, she doesn't want this person to always look so indifferent when facing her. So Zhou Yuyu said that she told him the biggest secret after her rebirth, and told him why she broke up inexplicably, why she inexplicably resented him, and the things about Yan Yan and Ji Yunshin being together in the previous life. She said it clearly one by one. She even said the date of their engagement clearly. At first, Lin Shirshu thought she was just talking nonsense because she was emotionally broken. But later he felt something was wrong. Many of the things she said were indeed in line with reality, especially when he saw Zhou Yuyu's serious eyes. Lin Shirshu's face became colder and colder, and his lips became tighter and tighter. He knew that this person was not lying. Maybe everything she said was true. This cognition shocked Lin Shirshu's brain for a while, especially when he heard Zhou Yuyu's description of the past life. He finally knew where her resentment, when she broke up some time ago, came from. But this matter was obviously not what he cared about. What he cared about was what Zhou Yuyu said, that Yan Yan would get engaged and married with Ji Yunshin in the past life. If what she said was true, if that was the case, there were some things he didn't dare to think about in detail. What happened in the past life? Could it happen again in this life? Lin Shirshu suddenly felt a little confused in his brain. If Zhou Yuyu told Yan Yan and Ji Yunshin about this matter, would they be together again? Chapter 236. Lin Shirshu finally left, returned to the hospital, and returned to his office. His mind was in a mess along the way, thinking about all Zhou Yuyu's words. He didn't know how to describe this matter, and the confusion in his heart. But if what Zhou Yuyu said was what really happened in the previous life, he didn't know what Yan Yan would think. But could Ji Yunshin really remain indifferent? Thinking of this, Lin Shirshu subconsciously took out his mobile phone. He originally wanted to call Yin Yin and tell her not to believe what anyone said. But when he saw the message on the screen, Lin Shirshu stopped swiping the screen. He didn't know what to say. This matter itself was extremely absurd. Whether you believe it or not, it would make people feel alienated. If Yin Yin regretted it and really reconciled with Ji Yunshin because of this matter, what should he do? After Lin Shirshu entered the office, there was no movement. He just sat there, staring at the half-finished report in his hand. And he didn't know how long he sat there, until the people in the duty room had finished get off work. The sky outside gradually darkened, and the originally dazzling sunlight gradually eased a lot. The last remaining light rushed into the room through the blinds and shone on the office table. But it only shone on the off-duty period. The other half was a little dim, because there was no light. Lin Shirshu sat for so long and finally came back to his senses. His body was a little stiff. When he moved slightly, a slight tingling numbness spread from his limbs, as if he was pricked by a needle, making Lin Shirshu's movements become a little slow and dull. After Lin Shirshu left the hospital, he turned around and went home directly. The lights in the house were already on. He had just changed his shoes when he heard a voice from inside the house. "Why did you come back so late today?" A dark head popped out from the sofa, with hair scattered behind his back. Then half of his face was exposed, his chin resting on the backrest, his whole body lying on the sofa cushion, staring at him with disgust. "You still remember to come back? You said you would have dinner with me? What time is it now?" She was wearing a pink pajamas with a loose collar, and a little bear with squinting eyes and dozing on it. She looked lazy and casual, but was particularly likable. Lin Shirshu was not angry at being despised, but his expression was much more relaxed. He looked up at the time and replied honestly, "A little after 8 o'clock. It's still a little after 8 o'clock. It's already 8:30. And you dare to talk back to me." His girlfriend couldn't help getting angry at the sight of this honest look, and she stared at him with a weird look. Lin Shirshu walked towards his girlfriend on the sofa and sat down beside her. When Nan Yin was still wondering if there was something wrong with this man today, he suddenly reached out and gently hugged her into his arms and coaxed her softly, "No, I'm just a little busy at work." Nan Yin could see that something was wrong with this man. He was so energetic when he went out in the morning. Why did he look so lifeless when he came back? She pushed away the man's head that was leaning over, looked him up and down, and looked at him suspiciously. "You've been acting so strange recently. Since yesterday. Did you do something to let me down?" Lin Shirshu couldn't help but chuckle. And now he felt better. But he still held her in his arms, holding her arms like a child holding his toy bear, and said with a smile, "It's nothing. You still want to fool me. Do you really think I can't see it?" Nan Yin would never believe him. It was so obvious that something was wrong. If she couldn't see it, she would be a fool. Anyway, when a girlfriend is unhappy, she will make trouble for no reason. This is probably a little interest between the two of them. She rushed over and pressed on him. Lin Shirshu couldn't keep his body steady for a while, and was pressed under him, watching his girlfriend do whatever she wanted on him. He was not angry. Nan Yin reached out to pinch his face, and asked in a serious tone, "Did someone say something to you? Tell me the truth. What good things have you done behind my back?" The girlfriend's body was light and soft, and had a unique fragrance. She rushed over so fiercely that Lin Shirshu was pressed tightly by her. His head tilted back, and his whole body was pressed down on the sofa. The silver necklace stained with her body temperature also slid down in the direction of the fall. Her collar was loose and slightly lowered. Lin Shirshu looked up, and his eyes just touched the fair and smooth skin and the faintly undulating curves inside. Before, Lin Shirshu might be uncomfortable and would blush and avoid his sight. Even if he was thinking about it in his heart, he would not show it. But the relationship between the two is different from before. Or perhaps the shock he received today is a bit big. Dr. Lin suddenly reached out and pressed his slender fingers on his girlfriend's waist and back, pressing down hard, just enough to push the person in his arms down. And his cheek rubbed against the soft and delicate skin. "Is there anything good I can do?" He stroked her back with his fingers, pressed down, and his cheeks pressed closer to hers. "Is that so?" Nan Yin was shocked by this man's shameless behavior. He took advantage of her so openly and buried his chest without blushing. Well, she didn't mind it much. After all, they were lovers, and it was quite comfortable to hug like this. But Nan Yen couldn't help but glare at this man and pulled his head away. When did you become so shameless? Such shameless words can be said. Lin Shirshu didn't say anything, but gently rubbed her skin. The distance between the two was very close. So close that their breath blended and their skin touched. Nan Yan's body slowly relaxed. Perhaps because he felt his girlfriend's relaxation. He didn't let go of his hand, but stuck to his girlfriend's body, raised his head skillfully to capture her lips, and kissed her smoothly. The two kissed many times, but every time there was a feeling that made Lin Shirshu's chest soft, and the soft touch on his lips made him unable to help but tighten his strength. Yen Yen. Lin Shirshu couldn't help but call her name, and kissed her neck again. The fine and dense kisses fell like dense raindrops. Itchy. Nan Yen tilted her head to avoid his kiss, feeling helpless. If this man did something directly, she would be better. But he was so close to her, and the fluffy and subtle touch of his hair rubbing against her neck made her feel indescribably weird. Kiss me, please? There was a hint of request in his suppressed voice. He stretched his head over, and as long as Nan Yen lowered her head, she could easily kiss his face. Nan Yen had never seen Dr. Lin like this. She thought it was quite mysterious. She looked at him carefully, and thought he was probably acting like a spoiled child. However, Dr. Lin's acting like a spoiled child was not the kind of sticky and soft method. Maybe he couldn't do that kind of gesture. So he looked at her with his dark eyes, and then lowered his voice, and called her name in her ear. Yen Yen. Lin Shirshu whispered her name again. Nan Yen couldn't resist her, so she lowered her head, and kissed him firmly on his lips. Dr. Lin's emotions were obviously fluctuating. He couldn't help but hug the person in his arms tighter, and then took the initiative to meet him. Now the two of them were closer. The couple fooled around on the sofa for a while, until Nan Yen couldn't stand this person's stickiness anymore. Lin Shirshu let go. He hugged his girlfriend and sat on the sofa. Nan Yen leaned in his arms, and there was a rare warmth between the two. Although the two of them usually spend a lot of time together, Dr. Lin rarely shows such understanding and tact. He is usually more direct, and will express his demands directly to his girlfriend. But today is obviously different. After the warmth, Dr. Lin did not say anything. Perhaps because he did not know where to start. He reached out and held his girlfriend's right hand, then looked at them one by one. Nan Yan's fingers were thin and white, and they fit perfectly in his palm. Nan Yan felt a little strange when being touched. She watched the man put his right hand close to her to compare it, put the two hands together, and then touched the ring on her finger. There was no movement for a long time, and she did not know what he was thinking. Finally, she could not help but pull her fingers back, and then asked, "Why are you always so weird lately?" Lin Shirshu chuckled, tightened his grip on his girlfriend's hand, and asked calmly, "Do you like me?" Nan Yen didn't react much. She was very comfortable leaning on her boyfriend's arms. Her voice was neither high nor low, and it sounded very casual. "I like you. What's wrong? Did anyone gossip to you?" Lin Shirshu's eyelashes fluttered slightly, and he lowered his eyes to look at the person in his arms. He still couldn't help asking this crucial question, but his voice was a little low. How about compared to Ji Yunshin? On his face, there was no longer the previous ease. His black eyes looked at the person in front of him quietly. In the end, he still cared a little. Cared about what Zhou Yu said. Nan Yen was stunned when she heard this. She turned her head to look at the person behind her. Seeing the expression on his face, her voice paused. "Why are you talking about this for no reason?" Lin Shirshu did not give in this time. He looked at his girlfriend with a gentle look, as if he didn't care at all. But he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart because Yin Yin didn't answer him immediately. "Can't I ask?" "It's not that I can't. But this question is completely unnecessary." Nan Yin pinched his fingers and couldn't help pinching his palm. "You are being unreasonable. Why do you ask about him for no reason? We have already broken up." Lin Shirshu didn't have any strange expression on his face. He lowered his head, and his eyelashes drooped, leaving a small light shadow on his eyelids. Lin Shirshu's mood was relatively stable. He asked again, "Then are you with me because of him?" This question has actually been suppressed in his heart for a long time. He didn't say it because he didn't want to say it, but now it may be suppressed for a long time. He feels that the two of them will eventually solve this problem, so he asked it according to his heart. Nan Yen was stunned at this moment. She just looked at him, and their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Something should be understood without saying anything. Nan Yen was obviously unhappy. She supported her arm and got up from his arms. But this time Lin Shirshu didn't let go of her hand at all. Nan Yin reached out to pry his palm open. Lin Shirshu, I don't like the way you are now. Hearing this, Lin Shirshu tightened his grip on her wrist a lot. He was probably angry too. He had been angry from the beginning. He looked up at her. What? Nan Yan's tone also became angry. If you have anything to say, you can tell me directly. There is no need to test me like this. As she said this, she tried to pry his fingers open again. This time, the force was much heavier. Lin Shirshu's palm was quickly pried open. After prying it open, he pushed the man away and sat on the other side. This is not a test. I'm just talking to you seriously. Yan Yin, this question is not difficult to answer. I know you were with me at first because of Ji Yunshin. What about now? Nan Yin pursed her lips tighter. She looked up at the person in front of her. Mist in her eyes gradually condensed. So you think I'm with you to retaliate against Ji Yunshin? Right? Lin Shirshu. Are you a fool? Can't you feel it at all? Lin Shirshu quickly leaned over again. He wanted to reach out and grab her wrist. But seeing Yin Yan's aggrieved and repulsive attitude, he could only take a deep breath and calm down the annoyance in his heart. I don't mean to quarrel with you. And I'm not chasing the past. It's just that your attitude. I can't feel it. Yan Yin, can you be patient with me? Nan Yin relaxed a little, and her mood seemed to be much more stable. When did I lose patience with you? It's obviously you who has been acting weird recently. And you didn't tell me when I asked you. Lin Shirshu saw her face slowly turn. So he took the opportunity to hold her fingers again. He didn't want to argue with her in such a situation. He knew that what he said today might be a little impulsive. But he just wanted to make sure. And he didn't know if he could face it. I'm sorry. Lin Shirshu lowered his head and apologized to people. My tone just now was a little bad. But what I want to tell you may be a little incredible. He paused for a while before continuing to add. Yan Yin, I went to see Zhou Yuyu today. And she told me some unbelievable things. After hearing about his meeting with Zhou Yuyu, Nan Yin unconsciously pursed her lips. Maybe she anticipated what he was about to say. So her face looked a little bad. Nan Yin wanted to pull her hand out of his palm. But he held it too tightly. She couldn't pull it away, and could only be held by him like this. This made her feel a little depressed. So she simply replied, just say what you want to say. She said that she has memories of her previous life. Lin Shirshu thought about it, and said it anyway. He didn't want Yin Yan to know about this from Ji Yunshin. Didn't want himself to be passive because of it. And didn't want her to give the other party a chance because of this. After saying this, Nan Yin was indeed stunned. She didn't expect Lin Shirshu to tell her about this matter. And she didn't expect Zhou Yuyu to tell him about her rebirth. Isn't she afraid that others will think she is crazy? Shouldn't she tell Lin Shirshu everything she said when she was talking nonsense in the hospital? This person's brain circuit is indeed different from that of normal people. However, she quickly reacted, and understood it in her heart. But her face still had that incredible and weird expression. Nan Yin touched her boyfriend's head, then looked at him suspiciously for a while, and finally pushed him away. What memories of the previous life? Are you crazy? And you believe such a mess? Even if there are memories of the previous life, what does this have to do with me? It has something to do with it. Yan Yin. Lin Shirshu pinched her fingers and spoke with some difficulty. I didn't lie to you. I asked her a lot of things. And they are indeed correct. Yan Yin. If it is true as she said, you married Ji Yunshin in your previous life. He knew Yan Yin didn't believe it. But he still said it. And told Yan Yin everything Zhou Yuyu had told him. This also stopped Nan Yan's original attempt to break free from his hand. She looked at him in a daze. Lin Shirshu's words were indeed his worries. Because Zhou Yuyu said those words with confidence. She also said that if it weren't for her interruption, Yin Yin and Ji Yunshin might have been ready to get engaged. They had been together for so long. Which was different from him. From the beginning, he had no confidence. He felt that if Zhou Yuyu wanted to use this matter to retaliate against him, she did it. And he was indeed upset because of this matter. Yan Yin, I don't want to force you. I just want to tell you that we can get along slowly. But if Ji Yunshin also knows about this, he will definitely come to you. At that time, will you choose to be with him? This completely puts the right to choose in her hands. As Zhou Yuyu said, one is the marriage partner in the previous life. And the other is just a boyfriend she slightly likes. Does she really not care at all? This made Nan Yin silent. She probably hasn't recovered yet, and didn't know what to say for a while. What would a normal person's reaction be when hearing about his or her previous life? Nanyin thought about it carefully. She felt that when facing this situation, she must stay calm. After all, this matter was not a trivial matter. So after taking a look at him, Nanyin pulled her fingers out of his palm, then shook her head and said, "I don't know. What you said was too sudden, which surprised me a little. I have never heard of such a thing before. Please leave me alone and don't force me. Okay?" Lin Shirshu looked at the fingers of the two people separated, feeling a little irritated, but at this time, he could only suppress the emotions in his heart and try his best to maintain a calm appearance. "I didn't think of forcing you. Yan. I can give you time to think, but this time should not be too long." "Okay?" Nanyin agreed, turned around and went back to the house alone. She really didn't expect Zhou Yu to say this, but it was not a big problem. Maybe this world is about to end. Lin Shirshu said that he would give Nanyin time to think, so he would not force her. The two of them put this matter aside tacitly. But before the result came out, Ji Yunshin came over, which was probably fate. Chapter 237. For some reason, Zhou Yu told Ji Yunshin about her past life, and she made it very clear. She also apologized to him. But what's the point of apologizing now? In the room full of the smell of disinfectant, all three people were there. It was a week later when Ji Yunshin learned the news, and the injuries he suffered from the car accident were not serious. He told himself that he was not the kind of person who would keep pestering. He had made it very clear about the last car accident, but Zhou Yu's words still stirred a ripple in his heart. He wanted to know what Yanyan thought. "I wanted to fight for the last time, even if I didn't do anything. I wanted to make things clear with the two of them. If they really missed each other in the end, it was probably not meant to be. But before that, he had to meet Lin Shirshu first. So the situation became like this." Nanyin came to the hospital after receiving Ji Yunshin's call. But after coming, she saw Lin Shirshu was there. It seemed that something had happened between the two of them, and the atmosphere at the scene was obviously a little frozen. Ji Yunshin sat on the hospital bed, looking out the window, making it hard to tell what he was thinking. The boyfriend on the other side lowered his head, and there seemed to be no unusual expression on his face. But when Nanyin entered the room, his body still paused for a moment. Nanyin hesitated for a while and walked towards her boyfriend, stretched out her hand and held his palm, and then asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen between you two?" The boyfriend took the opportunity to hold her fingers, and seeing her subconsciously walking towards him, Lin Shirshu was relieved in his heart. In fact, nothing happened between him and Ji Yunshin. But they just talked it out. Since they knew everything, there was no need to hide it anymore. Lin Shirshu was not the kind of person who would hold on to the past. Nothing, just a few words. Can a few words cause such a commotion? Nanyin didn't believe it. But that didn't stop her from pretending to be blind. Hearing the noise, Ji Yunshin, who had been looking out the window, turned his head, and his eyes fell on the two people's clasped hands. His eyes instantly became dim and obscure. Ji Yunshin's eyebrows slightly sank. His eyes slowly fell on Nanyin beside him, and he said in a low voice, "I remember that Dr. Lin still has a lot of things to do. I don't need to be taken care of for the time being. Can you please go out first?" Lin Shirshu frowned. This meant to send him away. But what couldn't be said in person? Lin Shirshu didn't want to give the two a chance to be alone. He always felt uneasy in his heart. This uneasiness might be because his recent relationship with Yanyan was not handled well. He turned his head to look at his girlfriend, and seemingly put his arm around her waist. "Would you like to go out with me? I remember you haven't had lunch yet. Can I take you to eat?" When he said this, his eyes also eased a lot. He didn't want others to see the problem between the two of them at this time. However, the hands that he had been holding in his palms gently pushed him away this time. Nanyin shook her head at him, and said in a light tone, "I'm not hungry. Go eat by yourself." I still have something to say to him. Lin Shirshu pursed his lips tightly, and he suddenly felt that his calm mood had become not calm at all at this time. He actually wanted to take his girlfriend away directly, but he knew it was impossible. Lin Shirshu's heart sank slightly. He paused for a while before speaking. "Okay, then you can chat first. You can come to me after the chat. I'll wait for you in the office." He took a deep breath and said that he would close the door after leaving, but his face looked a little bad. After Lin Shirshu left, there were only two people left in the room. The blue and white striped curtains fluttered gently with the wind coming in from the window. and they looked a little dazzling under the afternoon sun. Nan Yan looked at Ji Yunshin in front of her. He looked much better. So she asked, "What did you say to Lin Shirshu? I thought you knew." Ji Yunshin raised his face slightly. His lips were still a little pale, but his mood was still very stable. He looked at Nan Yan standing in front of him quietly, and his voice was a little low. "Yan Yan, if no one else disturbed us, we might have been engaged now. And you don't like him that much, right?" Ji Yunshin tightened his fingers slightly. He really didn't want to give up this relationship, especially after hearing what Zhou Yu said. Not everyone can get together perfectly. Whenever he thought about the fact that he and Yin Yang could have had the chance to get engaged and married, and that they could have had a better ending, he felt a sense of reluctance and powerlessness in his heart. So he wanted to see Yin Yan's attitude. If she knew about these things, would she be reluctant to leave him? Ji Yunshin's eyes were always on Nan Yan. Nan Yan also turned her head to look at him. This man looked much thinner than before, with slightly longer hair on his forehead, and a melancholy look in his eyes, especially when the light from the window fell on his face. At such a close distance, Nan Yan could even see the small scar on his forehead that had not yet healed completely, which was also left by the car accident. She shook her head and said, "It doesn't matter what happened in the past. I came here to tell you clearly that I will not be with you again just because of what Zhou Yu said. After all, those things are too unbelievable. Whether they are true or not, they have nothing to do with me now." Ji Yunshin's fingers turned slightly white. His eyebrows drooped, and he was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he laughed softly, laughing at himself for being powerless, but unwilling to give up so easily. "What about Lin Shirshu? Do you think you two can still be together without any grudges? Yan Yan, I can see that you two also had a dispute over this matter, right?" The black eyes looked at the direction of the door quietly, and then told a fact. "He actually doesn't trust you very much, and doesn't believe in the feelings between you two, and you are not completely unaffected. If time goes on, you will still quarrel over this matter. Yan Yan, do you believe it?" Nan Yan's sight paused in the direction he was looking, and naturally realized something. But she didn't react much. Just asked, So? Ji Yunshin took a deep breath. "I'm not making things difficult for you. I just want to give you the right to choose. Yan Yan, now I am the same as him. Even if you want to reconsider, give me a chance. Okay?" This is the last thing he can do. After he finished speaking, he waited for the answer with some trepidation. He didn't ask her to agree to him immediately. He just hoped that there would be a chance, as long as she was willing to give him this chance. He was confident that he could impress her. After all, they had been together for such a long time. He was not a blindly confident person, but he had to try many things. There was also someone standing against the wall outside the door, with a dull look in his eyes. Lin Shirshu was also waiting for Yan Yan's answer. Since the last time, his relationship with Yan Yan has not recovered, and the relationship between the two has become unnatural. So he is also uneasy. He even thought about whether to rush in and drag her away before Yan Yan's answer came out. As long as she didn't say the answer, he could pretend not to know, until he heard Yan Yan's next sentence. "Sorry, I don't want to." Nan Yan shook her head, and the voice continued to ring. "The person I like is my current boyfriend. No matter what Zhou Yu said to you, no matter what kind of quarrels I had with my boyfriend, these are things between the two of us and have nothing to do with outsiders." Her tone of voice was neither light nor heavy. It was that kind of calm and serious tone. "I came to you just to make it clear to you that I will not break up with him because of this matter." Nan Yan lowered her head and looked at Ji Yunshin. Ji Yunshin's lips moved. He looked at her, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say a word. It had come to this point, and there was nothing more to say. Nan Yan looked at the direction of the door, thought about it, and continued. "At the beginning, I was with him because I was angry. But after getting along for a long time, I found that I was at a disadvantage, because this person has shortcomings all over his body." She counted carefully on her fingers, but her voice became more and more gentle. "He has a bad temper. When he is angry, he doesn't like to say it, and he always likes to ignore people, requiring people to spend time to coax him. And he has many strange problems all over his body. I won't have a pet. I won't be allowed to go home late. And she said it's not good for girls to drink. She's more nagging than my mom. And most importantly, she has a bit of obsessive-compulsive disorder. She was full of disdain to list this man's shortcomings. But in the end, she couldn't help laughing and said softly, "But who told me that I like him now? I know he's in a bad mood recently. And I know he's suffered a big shock for a while. So I want to let both of us calm down for a while. But I never thought of breaking up with him. Do you know my choice now?" The people outside also heard these words clearly. Lin Shirshu's lips moved, and he felt a little sour in his chest. He didn't know if what she said was serious. She could have made it clear to him. But she had to step on his heart and tease him like this. What else the person inside said later, Lin Shirshu couldn't hear clearly. He stood for a long time, and finally came back to his senses. He felt that he should be happy, but he didn't know why his chest felt sore. Until the end, Lin Shirshu didn't know how he left here. On the other side, Nan Yen, after talking to Ji Yunshin, was ready to go find her boyfriend. But when she found the office, she didn't see anyone. No one answered the phone. Nan Yen had to go find him by herself. She met a few nurses on the way, and asked around before she found out that Dr. Lin had just gone out. Nan Yen chased in the direction the nurse pointed, and finally found her boyfriend sitting in a daze, by the flower bed, on a secluded tree-lined avenue downstairs. The fragmented light shone on him through the mottled shadows of the trees. Dr. Lin didn't look very happy. Nan Yen walked over, and sat down next to him. Dr. Lin didn't react much. She thought that maybe what she said just now irritated him. Why did he look so unhappy again? She decided to strike first, and get upset first. "Why are you hiding here alone? Didn't you agree to wait for me in the office? You didn't answer my call." Lin Shirshu didn't turn his head to look at her. His eyelashes moved slightly. The light fell on his eyelashes, revealing a gloomy atmosphere. But his tone was a little cold. "I don't need your pity." Nan Yen was not convinced this time. So she simply stretched out her hand to pry his face, turned his head to face her, and then asked him, "When did I pity you?" Lin Shirshu met her eyes. He knew he shouldn't be angry. He should stop while he was in a good mood. Maybe people in love are a little hypocritical. He can't control his emotions now. On the one hand, he suspects she is lying. On the other hand, he feels moved by what she said. Because he cares. So he demands more. "Do you think I can't see it? You know I'm at the door. So you deliberately say those words to me. Right?" It's not that he can't hear such obvious words, but he just can't help but want to take it seriously. Lin Shirshu tightly grasped his girlfriend's hand. Nan Yen was stunned for a few seconds and looked at him strangely. She felt that this man was somewhat contradictory. If he really didn't care, why did he hold her so tightly? She felt that this man's current state was probably that "I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen. I won't listen to anything you say." In the end, he still wants someone to coax him. Nan Yen suddenly wanted to laugh, but she held it back. She felt that Dr. Lin was a bit hypocritical and unreasonable. Nan Yen thought about it, and then her eyes turned a little flat when she looked at him. "Then do you want to break up with me?" When he said the word break up, the strength in his hands was obviously much tighter. Dr. Lin clenched his palms, and was so angry that his chest was blocked. "You said so much, and in the end you only said this to me?" She knew what he wanted to hear, but she liked to say such hurtful words. To outsiders, it seemed that he was cold and strong in their relationship. But in fact, wasn't she the dominant person? Nan Yen pursed her lips, and couldn't help looking at him. "What else? When I didn't say anything, you urged me to make a decision. And when I said it, you didn't believe it. Don't you know that you are unreasonable? I didn't know you were such a person before. If you want to break up, just say it. I'll go find Ji Yunshin and repeat my words now. When he gets better, I'll get engaged to him." Nan Yen started to say something shocking again, regardless of her boyfriend's angry look. She continued, "After we get engaged, we'll go traveling together. Then leave the city and never come back. Just like Zhou Yu said. We'll live happily without anyone to bother us. We'll have a beautiful child in the future. And the child may look like his father." Before she finished speaking, the rest of her words were blocked in her throat. Nan Yen was bitten by someone. And it hurt. It started with a hard bite, and then it turned into a kiss. Lin Shirshu couldn't help it anymore. He grabbed her waist fiercely, and pressed her into his arms, almost strangling her waist. "Is it just me that you can't do? You know I care about you. But you can still say those words to Ji Yunshin in front of him. Why can't you say something nicer to me? Don't lie to me. Okay? Do you think it's fun to lie to me?" He actually knew that Yin Yin had told him a lot of lies. from the beginning to now. So many that he couldn't tell them apart. But he never said it out loud. What he cared about was her attitude. Lin Shirshu felt helpless. Why can't you be more careful? I don't ask for much. Even if you want to lie, can't you be more serious? Lin Shirshu let him go a little. Nan Yen didn't care about him biting her. She reached out and touched his face. Then his hair. Her boyfriend was a little relaxed by the touch. He looked a little weak. Nan Yen looked at him calmly. This kind of look was gentle, without any hurtful emotions. Nan Yen also kissed his eyelids and whispered to comfort him. I really didn't lie to you this time. What I said to Ji Yunshin was not a lie. Although I said it to you. That was my attitude. I didn't pity you or tease you. Are you really unwilling to believe me? Lin Shirshu looked at her, trying to see any false expression on her face. But he couldn't see it. So the originally tense expression on his face became a little forced. But he still refused to relax completely. So Nan Yen continued to coax him. I didn't care about what Zhou Yu said at all. It was obviously you who was just imagining it. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't know it at all. The boyfriend's expression eased again. Nan Yen took a breath and touched her lips with his fingers. Her tone was a little complaining. Besides, do you think you are the only one who has been wronged? Every time you get angry, you don't say anything. You just bully me. I can't even raise a puppy. Don't you think you are too much? Also, you bit me just now. Lin Shirshu's fingers touched a soft place with a slightly moist touch. He looked at his girlfriend in front of him. Her eyes were particularly soft. So soft that people could not resist at all. Lin Shirshu could not help but clench his hands. I'm sorry. He apologized. You really didn't lie to me? Nan Yen nodded. No. As soon as these two words were finished, Nan Yen felt her body being hugged tighter. So tight that it made her a little breathless. I will try my best to change those bad habits in the past. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is not impossible to change. I have consulted a doctor. It may take a long time. Are you willing to help me change it? Nan Yen said him. The fingers hanging by her side slowly rested on his waist. Lin Shirshu continued. It's not impossible to keep a pet. Can you keep a small one? I don't like those pets that shed hair. If you really like it, I am willing to accompany you. Nan Yen couldn't help laughing and heard him continue. I will work hard to earn money to support the family. This will never happen again. I am no worse than anyone else. I will tell you everything in the future. I will not keep it to myself when I am angry. I will comfort you when you are unhappy. So, Nan Yen nodded again and waited for his next words. But after waiting for a long time without hearing a reply, she pushed him away a little and asked him the follow-up. So, what? Lin Shirshu hugged his girlfriend again, and with a request in his tightened voice, he said tenderly, So, can you give birth to your child with me in the future? Chapter 238 The Female Match from Heaven, Extra. Is it old-fashioned to propose in a movie theater? Is it outdated to propose in a movie theater? No, it shouldn't be. Lin Shirshu flipped through the browsing history on his mobile phone from time to time, and his fingers nimbly swiped through the various posts and comments on the internet. He felt that the proposal method he racked his brains to come up with was not as tacky as those people on the internet said. He had been dating Yan Yan for more than half a year. His girlfriend was open-minded, greedy for his body, and had a heavy taste. He had been in a state of decline for a long time. It had been so long. And his girlfriend had eaten him up and slept with him. But she was reluctant to fulfill her responsibilities. He had mentioned the marriage many times. Both parents had met, and their attitude was very close. He was not bragging. But his girlfriend's parents were obviously very satisfied with him as a son-in-law. But that person turned a deaf ear to him, kissed his earlobe at night, nestled in his arms, and said that he was still young and she could enter the grave of marriage later. If he didn't agree, he would just make trouble. His shameless appearance was just like the little tyrant who did all kinds of things right after he ascended the throne in the TV series last night. The little tyrant was still shameless and demanded too much. Lin Shirshu seemed to have thought of something. He fiddled with the couple's ornaments hanging on his phone and poked the screen with his finger at the photo of his girlfriend eating an apple. The red little mouth was moaning in the night, and his ears couldn't help but blush. What can he do? Who told him that he likes it? Lin Shirshu leaned against the corridor, looking a little lonely. Through the reflection of the window, he could see his well-groomed hair at the moment. There was no excessive decoration on his face. He looked okay. Not that bad. He knew his girlfriend liked good-looking guys. His face was also quite to her liking. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten promoted so easily. Lin Shershi was not ashamed, but rather felt a little relieved and a little amused. Time passed by minute. His girlfriend hadn't come yet. Lin Shershi's legs were a little numb from standing, and he looked down at the screen of his mobile phone. It was already 4 o'clock, and the movie would start in half an hour. It was already late. He gradually became impatient, but his face remained calm. He wanted to call to ask about the situation, but when he thought of the way girls always put on makeup before going out, and the way his girlfriend bit his chin angrily before going out in the morning, Lin Shershi felt inexplicably guilty, coughed twice, and then honestly put away the phone. Blame him for his bad attitude last night. Thinking of what happened last night and the scene after the two got married, Lin Shershi thought about it for a long time, and the time for the movie to start was getting closer and closer. Some inexplicable thoughts came to his mind. Lin Shershi even wondered if his proposal had been exposed accidentally, and his girlfriend knew the news in advance, so she backed out at the last minute? Could she really have run away? Dr. Lin called his girlfriend, and the receiver made a few beep sounds, but no one answered the phone. Dr. Lin's face looked a little strange, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt it was possible. He felt that with his girlfriend's fearless personality, she might really have run away in a rage. Dr. Lin, with a gloomy face, pushed open the door of the waiting room and prepared to go out. But at this moment, an emergency dispatch call rang urgently. Dr. Lin, where are you now? The hospital has an urgent task, and it's not clear over the phone. Anyway, your adjustment for today's day off has been cancelled temporarily. There was a car accident in the central city. The hospital is short of staff. Come quickly. The voice on the other end of the phone could not hide the anxiety, and the footsteps were hurried, accompanied by the sound of the ambulance dispatching. Lin Shershi paused in his original action of pushing the door, and the force of holding the phone increased a lot. Car accident? Why at this time? Lin Shershi looked embarrassed, and then thought of the things he had prepared in advance tonight, and frowned. He sent several messages to his girlfriend's mobile phone, explaining that he had broken the appointment today and that he should work overtime in the evening, and then went downstairs and drove directly to the hospital. In the central city, about 400 meters below the intersection of the Xinjiang Bridge on Shiming Road, a serial car accident occurred. It is currently known that 7 people were injured. Dr. Liu was the attending doctor. He rushed to the scene with 3 ambulances as quickly as possible. When Lin Shershi arrived at the hospital, the ambulance had already returned. Lin Shershi quickly changed into the white work clothes handed to him by the nurse, and walked towards the emergency room while asking the nurse next to him for specific information about the car accident. The nurse hurriedly followed behind him. Dr. Lin, this car accident is quite serious. It is a serial car accident. What about the casualties? The nurse continued to report. There are 7 injured, 3 with minor injuries, and 4 with serious injuries. Among them, a young woman was the most seriously injured. Her abdomen was squeezed and hit, and her lower body was bleeding. Director Liu said it might be caused by miscarriage during pregnancy. Miscarriage due to car accident. Lin Shershi didn't expect the accident to be so serious, and his breathing was slightly choked for a moment. The pen in his pocket accidentally fell down. Lin Shershi paused, bent down to pick it up, took a deep breath, and his mood returned to normal. He raised his hand to take the record handed over by the nurse. His expression was still calm, and just as he walked to the door of the emergency room, he was stopped by Dr. Liu at the door. Dr. Lin, there is something I didn't tell you in advance. Lin Shershi was slightly stunned, but he quickly reacted, stopped and looked at the other party. What's wrong? Dr. Liu, is there anything else that I haven't explained clearly? No. You'd better avoid this operation. Lin Shershi frowned. Why? I'm worried that you are emotionally unstable. You may not know that your girlfriend was also in this car accident. She was the most seriously injured. She had a miscarriage caused by abdominal wall contusion. Dr. Liu opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, he saw the face of the man opposite him suddenly turn pale. Lin Shershi's expression was instantly distorted, and his head couldn't help but buzz, as if he was hit hard by something, and his body shook uncontrollably. He staggered back 2 steps and held the wall to stand firmly. Dr. Liu on the opposite side hurried forward to support him. Hey, Dr. Lin, calm down first. Before he finished speaking, Lin Shershi pushed his hand away. How could he calm down now? The person who got into the car accident was Yin Yin, his girlfriend. How could it be? How could it be possible? She was so energetic before leaving the house in the morning. How could she get into a car accident? Lin Xirshu's fingers trembled, and a layer of mist appeared in his eyes uncontrollably. No wonder no one answered the phone. It's his fault. It's all his fault. He wanted to give her a surprise secretly, and he didn't go out with her. Lin Xirshu couldn't hear what was said afterwards. He just felt that his hands and feet were weak at this moment, and he had no strength in his body. His heart was beating violently in his chest, as if it was going to jump out of his throat, making his brain chaotic. Lin Xirshu stumbled to the door. Dr. Lu followed behind. He had naturally met Lin Xirshu's girlfriend, and knew that she was preparing to propose recently. Who could have expected such a thing to happen? Surrounded by crying family members and patients, Lin Xirshu didn't know how he got into the operating room. He only glanced at the unconscious young girl on the bed, and was dragged out neatly by his colleague, who followed behind him. There was a door between the two. The strong smell of blood rushed into the nose. Lin Xirshu had never thought the smell of blood was so bad before. He saw his girlfriend lying on the bed bleeding a lot, lifeless, dying, and no response when he called her. So much blood was pouring out from her body, as if it couldn't be stopped. Lin Xirshu's eyes were wet and he thought, how could a person have so much blood? He didn't know how long he waited, until the emergency light in the operating room went out, until the door of the ward opened. The doctor came out, and then shook his head at the family members. The injury was too serious. There were serious congestion and damage in the lungs and chest cavity. Plus the uterus was damaged. There were too many bleeding holes. Such a serious injury is difficult to treat. Lin Xirshu's accumulated emotions completely accumulated to the peak. His fingers were clenched so tightly that he seemed unable to loosen them. He wanted to vent desperately, but didn't know how to vent. He couldn't say anything. His throat seemed to be blocked by a stone. An unspeakable bitterness spread from his nose. Is it fake? Did he lie to him? Lin Xirshu staggered and pushed open the door, and saw the lifeless girl lying on the bed at a glance. At that moment, he could hardly stand steadily. Just a little delay. The girlfriend who was still nestling in his arms, and acting coquettish in the morning, was now angry. He obviously had a lot of things to say to her, and a lot of things to do for her. His ring had not been given away yet. He also prepared a proposal today. Lin Xirshu couldn't hold it back any longer. Tears fell uncontrollably from his eyes, and he reached out to touch his girlfriend's face. I'm sorry. It's my fault. Can you get up? I still have a surprise for you. Take a look. This is the ring I bought for you. You haven't seen it yet. You are lying to me, right? Get up. I'm wrong. Please don't lie to me. Yin Yin. He begged repeatedly, but the person on the bed didn't respond. The painful and suppressed cry sounded in the room, and Lin Xirshu finally cried and felt that his chest was tightly grasped, making him use all his strength to hold her hand tightly. The force was too strong, and he only heard a snap in a trance. I don't know whose slap hit him in the face so cleanly and neatly. It really hurts to be hit. The touch on his face was painful and could not be ignored. Soft touch, with a little temperature. Then the hands began to do whatever they wanted on his face again, with a rather willful tone. What did you do wrong? Lin? What did you do wrong to me? Tell me the truth. What did you do behind my back? Dr. Lin, who was still immersed in sadness, suddenly trembled and woke up from his dream. The white ceiling came into view, and it was still a familiar scene. In the clean bedroom, a thin blue quilt covered his body. At this moment, it was not yet dawn, and the blue sky outside could be seen through the gap in the curtains. Dr. Lin opened his eyes and stayed there for a long time. His emotions fluctuated, and he was a little difficult to come back to his senses. His usually calm face showed a rare confused expression. Lin Xirshu's sadness in his dream could flow like a river. In reality, Dr. Lin felt grief and discomfort as he touched his girlfriend's soft chest. It was warm, not yet completely cold. Dr. Lin suddenly felt an indescribable feeling. Crying and laughing, sad and happy, but not very good. The body in his arms was alive and soft, and the whole body pressed on him. No wonder he couldn't breathe even in his dreams. Perhaps it was because he was distracted for too long. Slowly, he felt his breath recovering, and his body gradually regained consciousness from being out of control at the beginning. And it seemed that even his soul had settled down. Then he took a deep breath and finally came back to his senses. It turned out to be a dream. Fortunately, It was just a dream. Dr. Lin was very thankful. This dream was so terrible. Then again, why did he have such a terrible dream? Dr. Lin finally felt relieved. He put his arm around his girlfriend's waist and back. With a little force, he hugged her tightly in his arms. He gently rested his chin on his girlfriend's shoulder, regardless of the struggle of the person in his arms. He rubbed her ear with his side face. Dr. Lin was very skilled in coaxing his girlfriend. He explained to her, "Don't be angry. I didn't do anything wrong. I just had a nightmare." While speaking, a layer of moisture oozed out of his eyes uncontrollably. He didn't even dare to think about that scene. Nan Yin glared at him and looked at him suspiciously. "You didn't lie to me?" Lin Shirshu kissed his girlfriend's eyelids. Carefully recalled what happened in the dream. The feeling of palpitations. And slowly stroked his girlfriend's waist and abdomen with his fingers. His brows gradually relaxed. "No. I can't lie to anyone but you. What did you dream about?" Dr. Lin frowned, thinking back to the dream, and was a little repulsive. "I dreamed that you ran away with the baby while pregnant, and I couldn't find you. I cried so hard in the dream, and was just thinking about going away with you. But you woke me up with a slap." As he spoke, his hands blatantly touched her belly, and a subtle look flashed in his eyes. "Maybe the food was really good recently, and my girlfriend's waistline has increased." Nan Yin was really speechless. Can you have some shame? And run away with the baby while pregnant? Did this guy sneak a peek at her new novel again? Why does a grown man like reading romance novels so much? Dr. Lin didn't care what she was thinking. He held his girlfriend's fingers and looked up to see her rather disgusted expression. He thought about it and didn't hesitate. He opened the drawer of the bedside table and took out a ring box from it. Under his girlfriend's slightly surprised expression, he put the ring on her hand. "For you to wear for fun." Nan Yin couldn't help looking at him. The silver ring on her ring finger shone under the light. She lay on her boyfriend's chest and couldn't help but smile. "I was wondering why you always look at me with sneaky eyes recently. Did you buy a ring?" Lin Shirshu's breath was intertwined with hers. His ears were slightly hot, but he pretended to be calm. After all, it was the first proposal in his life. "Well, that's it. Then will you marry me?" The girlfriend reached out and rubbed his earlobe, her eyes full of teasing. "You are so naive. There are no flowers, no wine, no candlelight dinner. I don't even wear beautiful clothes. And you propose to me so casually. Will you agree with all these?" "Of course not. It depends on my mood." "Well, then when are you in a good mood?" "Of course, when a boyfriend fulfills his various obligations. Do I need to teach you this kind of thing?" After hearing this, Dr. Lin's expression suddenly became a little strange. His face flushed, and the palm of his hand touching his girlfriend gradually became hot. What should he do? The girlfriend seems to have a particularly strong demand, but he just likes this. What should he do?